Hey guys, tonight we're stepping behind the counter of a 19th century apothecary shop, that dimly lit, oddly fragrant establishment where desperate people handed over their coins hoping for miracle cures that were, let's be honest, often just expensive ways to feel worse. You're not a customer tonight though. You're the one wearing the stained apron, surrounded by hundreds of mysterious bottles, trying to remember which powder cures headaches and which one causes them. You're the apothecary's assistant, and you probably won't survive your first month without accidentally poisoning someone, possibly yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing this little community spread across the globe, from Melbourne at sunrise to Michigan at midnight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The bell above the door jangles as you push inside for the first time, and immediately your nose doesn't know whether to be intrigued or offended. The dominant smell is camphor sharp, medicinal, almost menthol-like, but it's layered with tobacco smoke clinging to the wooden beams, the earthy musk of dried herbs hanging in bundles from the ceiling, and something vaguely sulphurous you can't quite identify. There's also a faint sweetness, possibly from the glycerin compounds, mixing with the acrid bite of alcohol spirits. It's the kind of smell that announces itself 3 doors down on a foggy morning. Your eyes adjust to the dimness. 2 small windows at the front let in watery daylight, but the back half of the shop exists in permanent twilight. Dark wood shelving climbs every wall from floor to ceiling, and each shelf is crammed with bottles, clear glass, green glass, brown glass, some with handwritten labels peeling at the edges, others marked with elaborate printed insignias. Ceramic jars with Latin names painted in gilt letters crowd the lower shelves. Everything is slightly dusty because, frankly, who has time to polish 300 containers when people keep interrupting with their inconvenient illnesses? Mr. Pemberton, your new employer, glances up from his mortar and pestle, gives you the briefest nod of acknowledgement, and returns to grinding something that looks like tree bark. He's perhaps 50, with wire spectacles perpetually sliding down his nose and the kind of stoop that comes from decades of leaning over a counter. His collar is respectably starched, but his waistcoat bears the stains of 1,000 chemical mishaps. What? This is the man who will teach you everything about 19th century pharmacy, which means you'll learn both genuine therapeutic techniques and absolute nonsense with equal authority. Hang your coat, he says without looking up. Then come see the materia medica. You drape your jacket on the peg near the door right next to what you'll later learn is his specimen collection of interesting growths in jars, because apparently every apothecary needs a personal cabinet of curiosities, and approach the counter. Behind it, the shop opens up slightly. There's a preparation area with scales, measuring cups, a spirit lamp for heating compounds, and several mortars of different sizes. A massive ledger lies open, filled with spidery handwriting recording purchases, debts, and cryptic abbreviations. The backroom door stands ajar, revealing shelves of bulk materials and what might be a small still for distilling alcohol tinctures. The mainstream historical fact everyone knows is that 19th century apothecaries were basically the neighborhood drugstore, doctor's office, and general wellness center combined, especially in smaller towns where physicians were scarce and expensive. But here's something quirkier. Many apothecaries also sold artist supplies, candles, and even acted as informal dentists when necessary. Your respectable medicine shop doubled as a hardware store for anyone needing turpentine or linseed oil. Historians still argue whether this diversification made apothecaries more trusted community pillars, or whether it undermined their medical authority by making them seem too commercial. Mr. Pemberton lifts a green glass bottle from the shelf. Tincture of opium, he announces. Also called laudanum. Probably our best seller, though technically we're not supposed to admit that. He sets it down with a clink. This one's mercury chloride calomel. Excellent purgative. Terrible for your kidneys, but patients expect it. Another bottle. This is our arsenic solution. For complexion complaints mostly, though some doctors prescribe it for fevers. He says this as casually as if he's showing you where the broom is kept. You nod, trying to look competent while internally screaming at the fact that your first day involves handling substances that sound like a murder mystery's poison cabinet. You'll learn the rest as we go, he continues, finally meeting your eyes. The key is to look confident even when you're uncertain. Customers don't want hesitation. They want authority. Even if you're mixing something based on a recipe from Galen that hasn't been updated since the Roman Empire fell. He almost smiles. Almost. Which, between us, describes about half of what we do here. The bell jangles again. An elderly woman shuffles in, already launching into a detailed description of her grandson's cough. Mr. Pemberton straightens, his entire demeanour shifting into professional concern, and you realise you're watching a performance as much as medical practice. He listens, nods thoughtfully, and reaches for a bottle without even looking muscle, memory guiding his hand to exactly the right remedy, or at least the one he's decided to recommend. Welcome to your new life. You're standing in a world balanced between science and superstition, where every bottle might heal or harm, where your education is happening on the job with real stakes, and where the smell of camphor will cling to your clothes for years. That crooked shelf above the register, you'll memorize every bottle. That stain on the floorboards, you'll scrub it weekly and it'll never come out. This cramped, dim, oddly intimate space becomes your universe, and you're about to learn its rhythms, its secrets, and its surprising capacity for both genuine care and profitable nonsense. You take a deep breath, camphor, tobacco, mystery, and step fully behind the counter. Your education begins now. The shop itself measures roughly 15 feet wide by 25 feet deep, though it feels smaller once you account for the shelving jutting out from every wall and the counter bisecting the space like a wooden moat. This is your kingdom now, and medieval castles had more square footage. You'll spend 12 to 14 hours a day in this compressed environment, learning to navigate it in the dark, memorizing which floorboard creaks, which shelf corner catches your elbow, and exactly how far you can reach without a step stool. The front windows are the shop's only real concession to light. They're mullion divided into small panes by wooden or lead strips, which was partly aesthetic tradition and partly practical, since large sheets of glass cost a fortune and broke more dramatically. Each pane is slightly warped, giving the street view outside a gently distorted quality, like looking through old spectacles. During morning hours, these windows cast geometric patterns across the counter, creating little boxes of light that move with the sun's progress. By afternoon, though, the building across the street blocks most direct sunlight, and you're working in perpetual dusk. The ceiling is lower than modern buildings would dare, perhaps 8 feet at best, with exposed beams darkened by decades of smoke from oil lamps and the occasional chemical accident. Those beams support your drying herbs bundles of chamomile, feverfew, mint, and dozens of other plants hanging upside down in organized chaos. They rustle slightly whenever someone closes the door too hard, releasing little puffs of dried plant matter that drift down into customers' hair. No one complains. This is what an apothecary shop is supposed to look like, feel like, smell like. The atmosphere is part of the product. The shelving system is where the shop reveals its true character. The main display shelves behind the counter rise from waist height to the ceiling, requiring a rolling ladder that Mr. Scation Pemberton maneuvers with the grace of long practice. These are the showpieces, the beautifully labelled ceramic jars, the elegant glass bottles with gold leaf lettering, the impressive-looking compounds in matching containers. Everything here is positioned for customer view, arranged as much for psychological impact as practical access. The exotic imports get eye-level placement. The everyday remedies occupy the less prestigious real estate. But historians still argue whether this theatrical arrangement actually helped sales or whether customers would have preferred a more logical, alphabetical system. Some scholars think the visual drama reinforced the apothecary's expert status. Look how many mysterious substances I command, while others suggest it was just tradition nobody bothered updating, like still using Roman numerals on clock faces. Below counter level, invisible to customers, the real working inventory lives in pull-out drawers and cabinets. This is where you'll spend most of your prep time, crouching to access the bulk powders, the spare bottles, the ingredients too common or too ugly for display. Your knees will learn to hate these lower cabinets. There's a particular drawer that sticks, requiring a specific jiggling motion to open, and you'll forget this at least once a day for your first month, yanking it hard enough to rattle every bottle in the shop. The counter itself is thick oak, stained almost black from years of spills and scrubbing. Its surface is scarred with knife marks, burn rings from hot containers, and mysterious grooves that might be from repeatedly setting down the same bottles in the same spots over decades. Mr. Pemberton's workspace occupies the right side his scales, his favourite mortar and pestle, his mixing slabs. Your workspace, you'll learn, is the left side, slightly smaller, slightly less convenient. Apprentice territory. The back room connects through a narrow doorway that requires turning sideways if you're carrying anything larger than a bread box. Here's where the bulk supplies live barrels of various salts, large jars of preserved leeches, boxes of empty bottles waiting to be filled, and the small copper still that Mr. Still, Pemberton uses for making alcohol tinctures and distillations. A single window, even smaller than the front ones, provides barely adequate ventilation for a space where you're mixing volatile substances. The mainstream historical fact is that many apothecary shops experienced fires or explosions from improper storage or mixing, especially once ether and other highly flammable compounds became common. But here's the quirky detail. Some apothecaries deliberately kept their back rooms chaotic and mysterious, believing that customers felt more confident in the medicine if they thought it came from an incomprehensible alchemical process. A too-organized workspace looked suspiciously simple, like maybe the remedies weren't actually that special. Your confusion is literally part of the business model. One corner of the shop houses what every establishment needs, a spittoon, because gentlemen customers in the 1800s apparently couldn't go 45 seconds without expectorating tobacco juice. You'll be responsible for emptying this. They don't mention that part in the apprenticeship advertisements. The shop's architecture forces a particular kind of intimacy with customers. There's no browsing the aisles like a modern pharmacy. Everything happens at the counter, with you standing behind it like a priest at an altar. Customers approach, state their complaints or present their prescriptions, and wait while you assemble their remedies. The narrow space means you're always within arm's reach of them, hearing their whispered symptoms, smelling their various personal hygiene situations, becoming inadvertently familiar with the neighbourhood's collective medical anxieties. The door itself deserves mention. Heavy oak, fitted poorly enough that drafts whistle through in winter, but solid enough to keep the shop secure overnight. That bell mounted above it will become the soundtrack of your days, announcing arrivals with the same cheerful jangle, whether the customer is bringing business or just killing time. You'll learn to recognize regular customers by the pattern of their approach, the hesitant hover before the bell rings, the confident push that sends it jangling aggressively, the slow creak of someone too weak to open it properly. By the end of your first week, you could navigate this shop blindfolded. You'll know which shelf has the slight forward tilt, which floorboard squeaks where the roof leaks during heavy rain, and exactly how many steps from the counter to the back room door. This cramped, dim, slightly musty space becomes more familiar than your own bedroom. You'll dream about these shelves. You'll develop the permanent slight stoop that comes from working under low ceilings. And years later, the smell of old wood and camphor will instantly transport you back to this precise feeling, standing behind the counter in the weak afternoon light, surrounded by hundreds of bottles promising cures you half believe in, waiting for the bell to jangle one more time. Mr. Pemberton reveals himself slowly, like a tincture settling into layers. On the surface, he's the very picture of Victorian respectability starched collar, precise handwriting in the ledger, a voice that can shift from warm reassurance to stern authority within a single sentence. But spend a few days watching him work, and you'll notice the cracks in the professional facade. The way he sometimes pauses mid-pour, staring at a bottle as if silently questioning whether this remedy actually does anything. The sardonic half-smile when a customer insists on a treatment he knows is useless but profitable. The weary sigh he saves for moments when he thinks you're not looking. Mercury for syphilis, he tells you one morning, measuring out calomel powder with exacting precision. Standard treatment. Every doctor prescribes it. Every medical text endorses it. He taps the excess back into the jar. And it probably causes more suffering than the disease itself, but try suggesting an alternative and watch your reputation crumble. He wraps the powder in paper with practiced efficiency. Welcome to medicine, where tradition matters more than results. This is the contradiction you'll navigate daily. A man trained in pharmaceutical science who's simultaneously a skeptic of half the profession. Mr. Pemberton attended proper lectures, apprenticed under a respected master, can recite Latin pharmaceutical terms and complex chemical reactions. But he's also watched enough remedies fail, enough miracle cures prove worthless, and enough medical fashions change with the seasons to develop a healthy cynicism about the entire enterprise. He believes in some of what he sells. He doubts most of it. He sells all of it anyway because rent doesn't pay itself. His teaching style reflects this duality. When showing you how to compound a prescription, he's meticulous, measuring to the grain, explaining every step, insisting you memorize proper techniques. Precision matters, he'll say. If you're going to give someone medicine, at least give them the exact wrong amount consistently. But then he'll undercut his own lesson with an aside about how the underlying theory is probably nonsense. It's like learning carpentry from someone who thinks houses are fundamentally silly but still insists you use the right joints. The mainstream historical fact everyone learns is that 19th century apothecaries occupied a complex professional space between tradesmen and medical practitioners. They needed chemical knowledge but weren't quite doctors. They compounded medicines but couldn't diagnose. They were essential to healthcare but constantly defending their status. Mr. Pemberton embodies this tension perfectly. He's proud of his skills while resentful of his limitations. "Watch this," he says one afternoon when a particularly pompous physician arrives with a prescription. Mr. Pemberton reads the Latin script, nods deferentially, and begins preparing the compound exactly as written. The doctor hovers, watching with obvious distrust, as if you might substitute sawdust when he's not looking. After the man leaves, Mr. Card, Pemberton sets down his mortar with deliberate gentleness. That prescription was for a condition that doesn't exist, using a treatment that doesn't work, at a dosage that makes no sense. But I'm the tradesman and he's the physician, so we all perform our roles. Here's the quirky detail historians love. Many apothecaries kept private notebooks recording which remedies actually seemed to help and which were theatrical placebos. Mr. Pemberton has such a book hidden in his desk, filled with decades of observations. He'll occasionally consult it when no customers are present, cross-referencing a doctor's prescription against his own experience. Historians still argue whether these notebooks represent proto-scientific thinking or just anecdotal bias dressed up as data, but either way, they show practitioners trying to make sense of a medical landscape that was equal parts knowledge and guesswork. As a businessman, Mr. Pracebade and H-Man of the Gold, Swest Seer, Pemberton is pragmatic to the point of calculated. He stocks patent medicines he privately mocks because customers demand them and they're profitable. He maintains relationships with local physicians even when he thinks they're incompetent because prescriptions drive business. He's learned to read customers who needs genuine reassurance, who wants to be impressed by complexity, who just needs to feel heard regardless of what remedy they receive. It's not quite con artistry, but it's definitely performance. Mrs. Henderson will be here at 3, he tells you, checking his pocket watch. She comes every Tuesday for her nerve tonic, which is basically sugar water with a bit of valerian. Costs me 3 cents to make. I charge her 50 cents and she swears it's the only thing keeping her sane. He catches your expression. Before you judge, she's genuinely calmer after taking it. Placebo effect is still an effect. She's happy, I'm solvent, everyone wins. That's the business. His role as community oracle is the aspect he seems to actually enjoy. People confide in him about symptoms. They're too embarrassed to tell doctors, about family problems, about financial troubles. The apothecary counter becomes a confessional of sorts, and Mr. Pemberton has cultivated the gift of listening without judgment while his hands stay busy measuring and mixing. He knows which families are struggling with consumption, which husbands are drinking too much, which wives are probably pregnant before they've told anyone. This information never leaves the shop. That's part of the unspoken professional code bu-bu. It makes him one of the most informed people in the neighborhood. Discretion, he says, matters more than any remedy we sell. People need to trust us with their vulnerabilities. Break that trust once and your shop fails, regardless of how good your compounds are. Pemberton's perfectionism and doubt coexist somehow. He'll spend an hour ensuring a tincture is properly strained, then mutter that the whole formula is probably medieval superstition. He'll insist you clean the scales daily to prevent cross-contamination, then joke about how half the remedies we're so carefully measuring are basically expensive dirt. This isn't hypocrisy, it's intellectual honesty combined with professional obligation. He doesn't know what works, but he knows sloppy work definitely doesn't help, so precision becomes the only defensible position. Remember that camphor smell from your first day? You'll eventually realize, Mr. Pemberton uses it strategically, keeping the shop well stocked with aromatic compounds because the smell itself reassures customers. The scent says medicine, even before any actual treatment begins. It's all part of the careful theatre he's directing. Your master is exhausted, skeptical, and trapped in a profession he respects and doubts in equal measure. But he'll teach you everything he knows, including especially the things he's not sure about. The day begins in darkness. You arrive at the shop around 5:30 in the morning, fumbling with the heavy iron key that Mr. Stye, Pemberton, entrusted to you after your first week. It's still your proudest possession, proof that you're trusted, that you're becoming part of the shop's machinery rather than just an observer. The lock resists in the pre-dawn cold, requiring the specific jiggling motion you've learned, and then the door swings inward with its familiar creak. The morning shop smells different than during business hours. Colder, somehow. The overnight air has settled into layer camphor, still dominant, but mixed with the mustiness of undisturbed space, a slight metallic tang from the mineral compounds, and that persistent woody smell from the shelving itself. You light the lamp near the door first, always the same one, and its small flame pushes back just enough darkness to navigate to the next lamp, then the next. By the time all three are burning, the shop glows with warm yellow light that makes the bottle glass gleam like scattered jewels. First task, the fire. There's a small heating stove in the back room that needs coaxing to life, especially in winter months when the overnight temperature has dropped below freezing. You'll feed it kindling, then coal, nursing the flame until it's strong enough to actually warm the space. This matters more than comfort. Many of your compounds behave unpredictably in extreme cold. Tinctures crystallize. Ointments solidify. That expensive glycerin formula Mr. Pemberton keeps in the back corner will literally freeze and separate if the temperature drops too far. You've learned to check it first thing, a morning ritual that's part practicality and part superstition, like sailors checking their rigging before leaving port. While the stove works its magic, you sweep. The mainstream historical fact everyone knows is that 19th century sanitation standards were, shall we say, optional at best. But apothecary shops needed to maintain at least an appearance of cleanliness because customers were literally ingesting your products. Your broom has seen better decades, but it does the job, pushing yesterday's dust, tracked in dirt, and the occasional dead moth toward the door. You'll sweep the same floor tomorrow and find identical debris. It's somehow always moths. Where are they even coming from? The counter gets wiped down with a damp cloth, removing the sticky residue from spilled syrups, the powder dust from grinding sessions, and the mysterious stains that appear overnight as if the shop itself is conducting unauthorized experiments. You've stopped questioning it. Old buildings have their own logic. Next comes the critical part, stock assessment. You work through the shelves methodically, checking each bottle and jar against your mental inventory. This is where the summer morning routine becomes particularly anxious. Overnight heat can ruin everything. You check the syrups. First, the sugar-based compounds that ferment if they get too warm, developing bubbles and off-smells that mean you're pouring them down the drain and explaining the loss to Mr. Pemberton. Then the emulsions, those delicate mixtures of oil and water that separate when temperatures fluctuate. The leeches in their jar need fresh water, and inspection-dead leeches floating belly up are bad for business and worse for your already queasy stomach. Here's the quirky detail that most people don't realize. Apothecaries often stored temperature-sensitive compounds in the cellar during summer months, but this created an entirely different problem: dampness. You're essentially choosing between heat damage and mold growth, between spoilage and contamination. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of alcohol preservatives in 19th century medicines was actually about therapeutic properties or just the only reliable way to keep things from rotting between May and September. Your morning routine in July feels like triaging a battlefield, checking each patient to see what survived the night. The scales need attention too. You inspect them for accuracy using the standard weights kept in their velvet-lined box, making tiny adjustments to the balance mechanism. Precision matters, Mr. Pemberton's voice echoes in your head, even if the underlying medicine is questionable. A precisely measured wrong treatment is at least consistently wrong, which matters more than you'd think in a field where consistency is the closest thing to quality control you've got. You refill the oil in the lamps, they burn through it faster than seems physically possible, and trim the wicks to prevent smoking. The shop's atmosphere is already perfumed enough without adding lamp soot to the mixture. Then you check the front windows, cleaning the inside panes with vinegar water to remove the film of condensation and dust that accumulates overnight. Clean windows suggest a clean operation, even if the back room still looks like an alchemist's fever dream. The mortar and pestles, you've got 3 different sizes, now get inspected for residue from yesterday's grinding. Any leftover powder needs removing because cross-contamination between medications is exactly how someone ends up accidentally poisoned. You scrub them with coarse salt and warm water, your least favorite morning chore because it's repetitive and your hands are already cold, and the salt stings any small cuts you've accumulated from handling broken glass or sharp-edged bottles. Around 6:30, as the first grey light starts filtering through those mullioned windows, you update the dayboard. This is a small slate where you list the compounds Mr. M. Pemberton wants prepared in advance, the common remedies that multiple customers will request. Today it's cough syrup, 3 bottles, fever powders, 6 packets, and a fresh batch of the popular digestive tonic that's mostly peppermint oil and optimism. You'll prepare these before the shop officially opens at 7, ensuring the first customers don't wait while you frantically grind and mix. The last morning task is purely superstitious, though you'd never admit it. You straighten the bottles on the front display shelf, adjusting them to perfect alignment, even though customers will disturb them within minutes. It's a small ritual of control in a profession that's mostly guesswork. You arrange them like soldiers before battle, each in its place, labeled and ready. Something about the visual order calms you, suggests competence, implies that surely someone this organized must know what they're doing. By 7 o'clock, the shop is ready. The stove is burning steadily. The lamps are bright, the counter is clean, and you're standing behind it in your increasingly stained apron, looking as professional as exhaustion allows. The street outside shows signs of life doors setting up, workers trudging toward their jobs, the daily machinery of the city grinding into motion. You check the clock, straighten your collar, and wait for the bell to jangle its first announcement of the day. The learning curve isn't a curve, it's a vertical wall you're expected to climb while blindfolded and carrying a tray of poisons. Mr. Pemberton hands you a leather-bound book on your second week, its pages yellowed and crackling with age. The materia medica, he announces, as if presenting a sacred text. Everything an apothecary needs to know about medicinal substances. You'll memorize it. He pauses for effect. All 600 entries. You flip through pages dense with Latin names, botanical descriptions, preparation methods, and supposed therapeutic properties. Your stomach sinks. This is like memorizing a phone book written in a foreign language where every entry might kill someone if you mix up the details. But there's no alternative an apothecary who needs to constantly check references. Looks incompetent, and looking incompetent means customers go elsewhere. So you begin the grinding mental work of committing these hundreds of substances to memory. The materia medica divides roughly into 3 kingdoms: mineral, vegetable, and animal. The minerals sound like a periodic table designed by someone with a murder hobby. Mercury shows up in at least a dozen forms: mercury chloride calomel for purging, mercury oxide for skin conditions, mercury sulfide for supposedly treating syphilis. You handle these compounds daily, their silvery weight in your palm, knowing that chronic exposure causes tremors, tooth loss, and mental deterioration. Mr. Pemberton's hand shakes slightly when he measures it out. You've noticed, you don't mention it. Arsenic occupies its own special category of terrifying usefulness. Arsenic trioxide for complexion improvement, because apparently Victorian beauty standards involve deliberately consuming poison to achieve that fashionable pallor. Fowler's solution potassium arsenide, prescribed for everything from fevers to asthma to psoriasis. You learn to handle it with exaggerated care, always washing your hands afterward, always double-checking the label before dispensing, because mixing up the arsenic and the sugar powder would be what they call a career-limiting mistake. The vegetable kingdom offers slightly less immediately lethal options, though plenty of plants are enthusiastically trying to kill you too. Opium is your bestseller, by volume imported as sticky brown cakes from Turkey or India, dissolved in alcohol to make laudanum, or processed into morphine for the more scientifically minded physicians. Digitalis from foxglove plants for heart conditions, which actually works, though the dosing is a nightmare. Too little does nothing, too much stops the heart permanently. Belladonna for dilating pupils and reducing spasms, named Beautiful Lady because Renaissance women used it cosmetically, which tells you everything about historical beauty standards. Then come the botanical rarities that make you feel like you're working in an exotic import shop rather than a pharmacy. Cinchona bark from South America, source of quinine for treating malaria and fevers. Ipecac root from Brazil for inducing vomiting. Coca leaves from Peru, increasingly popular in tonics and wines for their stimulating properties, though you're pretty sure customers enjoy them more for the euphoria than the medicinal benefits. Ginseng from China for vitality, whatever that means. Camphor from Asian trees, that smell that defines your entire workspace. Each substance requires knowing its origin, proper storage, preparation method, dosage range, and the specific conditions it supposedly treats. The mainstream historical fact is that 19th century medicine relied heavily on imported botanicals because global trade networks finally made exotic substances widely available. What once cost a fortune now merely cost a lot. Your shop's inventory represents a compressed map of European colonialism. Every bottle a reminder of trade routes, imperial expansion, and the assumption that if something comes from far away, it must be powerful medicine. But here's the quirky detail that surprises most people. Animal-derived medicines were extremely common and often more trusted than plant-based ones. There was this pervasive theory that animal substances contained concentrated vital forces. So you stock dried Spanish fly beetles, cantorides for raising blisters on skin, as part of counter-irritant therapy, the idea being you give the body a new pain to distract from the old one, which is either ingenious or barbaric depending on your perspective. Historians still argue whether these vesicant treatments actually provided any therapeutic benefit or just caused additional suffering, while patients recovered despite the treatment. You've got ambergris, that whale intestinal secretion used as a fixative in perfumes and supposedly as an aphrodisiac, musk from deer glands for similar purposes, castoreum from beaver anal glands as an antispasmodic. You're not making this up. These are legitimate, widely prescribed medical ingredients. 18th and 19th century medicine had a fascinating relationship with animal secretions that modern people find deeply disturbing, and honestly, grinding up dried beaver glands every morning doesn't make you any more comfortable with it. Leeches occupy their own special place in your education. You've got jars of them in the back room, and you need to learn which species are medically appropriate, how to store them, how to encourage them to feed their picky eaters somehow, and how to remove them when they're done. They're slimy, disturbingly active, and you've been bitten twice already because you grabbed one carelessly. The anticoagulant in their saliva means those bites bleed for hours. You've developed a healthy respect for your invertebrate colleagues. The sheer volume of information is overwhelming. Each substance has multiple names, common name, Latin pharmaceutical name, sometimes regional variations. Each has specific preparation requirements. Opium needs dissolving in alcohol at specific ratios. Mercury compounds require careful heating. Some plants are only effective when harvested at particular times of year. Others need aging. Some must be fresh. You're essentially memorizing a cookbook where every recipe is in code, and the consequences of mistakes range from embarrassing to manslaughter. Mr. Pemberton quizzes you relentlessly. He'll point to a random bottle and demand its uses, contraindications, and proper dosing. Or he'll name a condition and expect you to recite 3 treatment options. Dropsy, he snaps during a slow afternoon. You scramble. Mentally, dropsy is fluid accumulation, so you need diuretics. Digitalis for heart-related cases, squill for lung involvement, mercury as a purgative if it's systematic. You recite. He nods. You've passed this particular test. There will be 40 more today. The imported substances fascinate and frustrate you. They're expensive, they're exotic, and half the time you suspect their reputation exceeds their effectiveness. That Chinese rhubarb as a gentle laxative probably works fine, but does it work better than the local stuff at 1/10 the price? You're not convinced, but customers specifically request the Oriental rhubarb, so you stock it and charge accordingly. Medicine and marketing are difficult to separate. You make flashcards from spare paper, writing Latin names on one side and users on the other. You quiz yourself during the dead afternoon hours. You wake up at night in a panic, convinced you've forgotten the difference between tincture of iodine and tincture of iron, even though one is brown and one is practically black and they're used for completely different purposes. Slowly, painfully, the knowledge sinks in. Bottles stop being mysterious containers and become specific, known entities. You can grab the right substance without looking. You can smell a compound and identify it. The materia medica is becoming part of your mental furniture, crowding out whatever you used to think about before your brain was filled with poison names. Knowledge is one thing. The actual physical labor of pharmacy work is something else entirely, and your right arm is developing muscles you didn't know existed. The mortar and pestle become extensions of your body. You'll use them for hours every day, grinding, crushing, pulverizing substances into the fine powders that form the base of most medicines. It's relentless, repetitive, and surprisingly brutal on your shoulder and wrist. By the end of your first month, you can barely lift your arm. By the end of 3 months, you could probably win an arm wrestling contest, though only with your right arm. Your left remains disappointingly normal. The technique matters more than brute force, Mr. Pemberton insists. You're not trying to destroy it, he demonstrates, working a pestle in smooth circular motions. You're persuading it to become powder. There's a rhythm to it. He makes it look effortless, the pestle gliding around the mortar's bowl, the substance gradually transforming from chunks to granules to fine dust. When you try, it feels like pushing a boulder uphill. Your movements are jerky, uneven. The powder clumps in corners instead of distributing evenly. Again, Mr. Pemberton says, not unkindly. So you dump it out and start over, loading the mortar with more crude opium, more dried herbs, more crystalline minerals, working the pestle until your wrist screams and sweat drips down your back despite the morning chill. Eventually, somewhere around week 5, something clicks. Your body learns the motion. Your muscles memorize the angle, and suddenly you're grinding smoothly, efficiently, almost meditatively. It's like learning to ride a bicycle, except the bicycle is made of stone and filled with substances that could kill someone if you mess up the proportions. The mortar and pestle set you use most is marbleia. Beautiful piece with a bowl roughly 8 inches across and a pestle that weighs perhaps 2 pounds. Marble is ideal because it's non-reactive and holds up to the acidic or oily substances you're processing. You've got a smaller brass set for particularly sticky compounds and a massive iron mortar that requires 2 hands to lift for the heavy-duty grinding of tough roots and bark. Each material has its purposes, its quirks, its tendency to stain or scratch or develop that one spot where powder always gets trapped. Your daily grinding list is relentless. Calomel needs pulverizing to a fine, even powdery grittiness, means someone swallows uncomfortable chunks of mercury chloride and they'll definitely complain. Opium must be worked until it's uniformly powdered, no lumps that could result in accidental overdose. Dried herbs need reducing to dust, fine enough to mix smoothly with sugar or flour for pills. Mineral salts require crushing from their crystalline form into workable powder. Each substance demands different amounts of time, pressure, and patience. The mainstream historical fact everyone learns is that pharmaceutical compounding was entirely manual labor in the 19th century. No electric grinders, no industrial processes, just human muscle and stone tools that hadn't fundamentally changed since ancient Egypt. Every medicine in your shop passes through someone's hands, absorbs someone's sweat and effort. It's intimate in a way modern pharmacy isn't. You're literally putting physical labor into each remedy. But here's the quirky detail. Many apothecaries believed the grinding process itself enhanced the medicine's potency through a kind of mechanical activation. This wasn't just superstition. They'd observed that freshly ground compounds often seemed more effective than pre-ground powders. Historians still argue whether this was actually about preserving volatile oils and active compounds that degrade during storage, or whether the belief in activation was just sophisticated placebo effect. Either way, you grind everything fresh daily because customers expect it, and Mr. Stayer, Pemberton insists on it. Mixing compounds is where the chemistry meets artistry. You're following recipesum from medical texts, some from centuries-old pharmacy manuals, some scribbled on stained papers that Mr. Stained Papers. Pemberton inherited from his own master. The instructions are maddeningly vague. Sufficient quantity of powdered opium, one recipe declares, without defining sufficient. Mix until properly combined, another suggests, leaving you to guess what properly means. You learn through trial and error, through Mr. Pemberton's corrections, through the occasional batch that turns out completely wrong and gets dumped down the drain. Pills are your nemesis. You're supposed to combine the powdered medicine with some kind of binding agent gum arabic, honey, glycerin and roll it into perfectly uniform spheres. Yours look like misshapen potatoes. Mr. Pemberton can produce dozens of identical pills in minutes, each one precise, professional. Your attempts are embarrassing. Practice, he says, not for the first time. So you practice, rolling pills during slow afternoon hours, developing the delicate touch needed to form spheres that are firm enough to hold together but not so compressed. They become rock hard. Ointments require a different skill set entirely. You're mixing powdered medicines into fatty bases lard, petroleum jelly, beeswax, working them together with a flat spatula on a marble slab. The goal is perfect homogeneity. No streaks of unmixed powder, no lumps. You fold and spread, the motion hypnotic if you can ignore the arm fatigue. The room temperature matters enormously. Too warm and everything melts into soup. too cold and you're trying to blend substances with the consistency of cold butter. Remember that camphor smell from your first day? You're the reason it's so strong. You grind camphor blocks into powder multiple times daily, releasing those sharp medicinal vapors that make your eyes water and your sinuses clear involuntarily. You've developed a technique of breathing through your mouth while working, though you still occasionally get a full faceful and spend the next 5 minutes sneezing. Tinctures are slightly less physically demanding but require patience you don't naturally possess. You're dissolving substances in alcoholopium for laudanum, iodine for antiseptic solutions, various herbs for therapeutic extracts. The process involves measuring precisely, mixing thoroughly, and then waiting days, sometimes weeks, for the extraction to complete. You've got bottles sitting in the back room right now, waiting for time to work its magic, which is frustrating because you're fundamentally a person who wants immediate results. Your hands are perpetually stained. Iodine leaves brown streaks that fade over days. Silver compounds create grey-black marks that look like you've been handling charcoal. Some plant extracts stain bright yellow or dark green. You scrub with soap and coarse sand, with lemon juice, with alcohol, and still your hands advertise your profession. Ladies pull their skirts aside when you pass on the street, assuming you're dirty rather than chemically stained. You've stopped explaining. The scales become your obsession. You've got a balance scale with brass pans, sensitive enough to detect a single grain of powder. Measuring precisely requires steadying your breath, waiting for the needle to settle, adding or removing powder grain by grain until the balance achieves perfect equilibrium. It's meditative when you're calm, infuriating when you're rushed. And you're frequently rushed because customers don't care about your careful measuring. They want their medicine now. Weekends find you practicing at home, much to your landlady's alarm when she discovers you've converted your bedroom into a miniature pharmacy workshop. But the only way to develop the muscle memory, the instinctive knowledge of what properly mixed looks and feels like, is through endless repetition. Your social life suffers. Your arm grows stronger. And gradually, batch by batch, you're becoming competent. The bell jangles at 8:15 and Mrs. Patterson shuffles in with her youngest child balanced on one hip. You recognize her immediately. She's here twice weekly with some new crisis. Today it's the child's cough, a wet, rattling sound that fills the small shop. He's been like this for 3 days, she says, her voice carrying that edge of maternal panic you've learned to identify. I can't get him to sleep. I can't sleep. Please, you've got to have something. You glance at the child. He's maybe 3 years old, flushed and miserable, and that cough does sound concerning, but you're 22 and your medical training consists entirely of 3 months grinding powders and memorizing Latin names. You are catastrophically unqualified for this responsibility, yet here she is, looking at you with desperate trust, and here you are, expected to solve it. Has he been feverish, you ask, channeling Mr. Pemberton's diagnostic approach. Some, not terrible, but warm to the touch. You mentally flip through your memorized materia medica. Cough, fever, child. I'll prepare a syrup, you tell her with more confidence than you feel. Ipecac to help clear the lungs, a bit of opium to ease the cough and help him rest, honey for the throat. You're already measuring, grateful for something to do with your hands, while your brain screams that you have no idea if this is right. 1 teaspoon 3 times daily. If the fever worsens, or if he struggles to breathe, you need to fetch the doctor immediately. She nods, clutching her coins. You take her money, hand over the bottle, and watch her leave with your remedy, hoping desperately that you haven't just made things worse. This is your life, now making consequential medical decisions based on incomplete knowledge and hoping for the best. By 9 o'clock, you've seen 4 more customers. A young woman requesting something for feminine troubles in a whisper so quiet you have to lean forward to hear. An elderly gentleman who wants his regular tonic but insists on explaining in excruciating detail the state of his bowels. A labourer with an infected cut on his hand that probably needs proper medical attention but who can't afford a doctor's fees, so you're cleaning it with carbolic acid and hoping it doesn't turn gangrenous. A well-dressed lady seeking arsenic wafers for her complexion, which you sell despite knowing they're literally poison, because refusing would just send her to a competitor who's less likely to warn her about the risks. The mainstream historical fact everyone learns is that apothecaries served as primary healthcare providers for working-class people who couldn't afford physicians. Sure, the affordable option, the accessible option, which means you're treating conditions that really should have professional medical supervision. It's a system that works until it very much doesn't. The mid-morning crowd brings a different demographic. Hungover gentlemen stumble in around 10 seeking remedies for stomach complaints that are transparently alcohol-related. They all have the same look, slightly grey, carefully avoiding eye contact, speaking in subdued tones because normal volume causes pain. You've prepared a standard hangover remedy. Bicarbonate of soda for the stomach upset, a bit of willow bark for the headache, some peppermint oil to mask the taste. It's probably as effective as anything else, which is to say, moderately helpful at best. Rough night? You ask one particularly dishevelled customer, unable to resist. He grunts something non-committal, pays, and flees. You've learned that hungover people appreciate efficiency over conversation. Then come the hypochondriacs, and they're a special category entirely. Mr. Henderson arrives at 11 right on schedule with a new mysterious ailment he's convinced is fatal. Last week it was heart palpitations. The week before, inexplicable numbness. Today he's certain he's developing consumption based on a slight cough he's had for approximately 6 hours. You've learned to take these visits seriously. Not because he's actually dying, but because dismissing him means he'll complain to everyone who'll listen that the apothecary doesn't care about his health. Let me prepare something soothing for your throat, you offer, which is your standard approach. You mix up a pleasant-tasting syrup that's mostly harmless, charge him a reasonable price, and provide the reassurance he actually came here seeking. He leaves satisfied, convinced, he's caught his consumption early, and you've successfully managed the interaction without either lying or wasting expensive medication on imaginary symptoms. Here's the quirky detail most people don't realize. Many apothecaries maintained informal mental health practices, essentially serving as therapists for anxious customers who needed someone to listen more than actual medicine. You spend half your time providing emotional support disguised as pharmaceutical care. The remedy is often less important than the act of being heard, understood, and taken seriously. Historians still argue whether this made apothecaries early mental health practitioners or whether it was just shrewd business keeping anxious customers happy means they keep coming back after all. The afternoon brings the regulars, people you now recognize by name and prescription. Mrs. Chen needs her laudanum refill. She's in constant pain from some injury years ago, and the opium is the only thing that helps her function. You measure it carefully, noting in the ledger that this is her 3rd bottle this month, wondering if she's developing dependency, but knowing you have no better alternative to offer. Mr. Sullivan collects his wife's nerve medicine, never meeting your eyes, and you suspect but don't ask whether he's the reason she needs calming remedies. The Wilson twins come in together, as always, for their father's heart medicine, counting out coins in careful cooperation. Between customers, you're restocking, cleaning, preparing tomorrow's common remedies. But mostly you're waiting for the bell, never knowing whether the next customer brings a simple request or a medical crisis you're unqualified to handle. A mother whose baby won't stop crying, a factory worker with chemical burns, someone coughing blood into a handkerchief. You're the first line of defense in a healthcare system that's mostly improvisation and hope. By 6 o'clock, you've seen perhaps 30 people. You've dispensed remedies ranging from probably helpful to definitely useless to potentially harmful. You've provided comfort, diagnosis, and confidence you don't genuinely possess. Your hands smell like camphor and carbolic acid. Your head aches from maintaining professional composure. And tomorrow the bell will jangle again, bringing the same parade of human vulnerability, the same desperate trust that you know something, anything that might help. The first time you accidentally taste arsenic, you're too shocked to panic immediately. You've been grinding the white powder for perhaps 20 minutes, creating a complexion treatment for one of your wealthier clients, and you've gotten careless about the fine dust floating in the air. You lick your lips absently, the way humans do 1,000 times daily without thinking, and there it has a metallic, slightly sweet taste that makes your stomach drop as you realize what you've just done. Mr. Pemberton notices your expression. "Arsenic?" he asks calmly, as if inquiring about the weather. You nod, frozen, mentally calculating how much constitutes a fatal dose versus how much probably just accidentally made it into your mouth. "Drink milk," he instructs, already pouring a cup from the small container you keep for mixing certain compounds. "It'll help bind it. You'll be fine, you barely got any. But this," he gestures at your powder-dusted face, "your inadequate attempt at careful handling, is why we wear dampened cloths over our noses when working with the dangerous ones." Pride kills apothecaries faster than the substances do. You drink the milk, hands shaking slightly, and return to grinding with a wet cloth tied across your face like a bandit. Lesson learned. Your body will absorb trace amounts of poison for as long as you work here, but you can minimize it with proper precautions. Probably, hopefully, the tremor in Mr. Pemberton's hands suggests that minimize is doing some heavy lifting in that sentence. The shop's poison inventory reads like a murder mysteries checklist. Arsenic in 3 different preparations. Strychnine for tonic purposes, supposedly stimulating the nervous system in small doses, though the margin between stimulating and fatal convulsions is terrifyingly narrow. Mercury in various compounds, that liquid metal that's simultaneously fascinating and insidious. Belladonna, which can dilate pupils or stop your heart depending on the dose. Prussic acid, basically cyanide prescribed for certain coughs, despite being one of the fastest-acting poisons known. Aconite from monkshood plants, so deadly that even handling the fresh plant can cause problems. You store these substances with exaggerated care. The most dangerous ones occupy a specific shelf, clearly labelled, kept slightly separate from the everyday remedies. Not locked away. You need frequent access, but positioned where you'd have to deliberately reach for them rather than grabbing them by mistake. Each bottle gets triple-checked before use. You develop nervous habits, reading labels aloud, verifying contents by appearance and smell before measuring, never working with poisons when you're tired or distracted. The mainstream historical fact that medical historians emphasize is that accidental poisonings from apothecary errors were distressingly common in the 19th century. Wrong substances dispensed, incorrect doses measured, contaminated compounds sold. The lack of regulatory oversight meant that apothecary competence varied wildly and mistakes could be fatal. You're acutely aware that you're one moment of carelessness away from killing someone and that knowledge creates a low-grade anxiety that never quite leaves. Laudanum deserves its own category of concern. It's opium dissolved in alcohol, roughly 10% opium content, and it's absolutely everywhere in Victorian medicine. For pain, for coughs, for diarrhea, for nerves, for insomnia, for basically anything where make the patient less aware of their problem seems like a solution. You dispense bottles of it daily, watching customers develop obvious dependency, seeing the pattern where they need it more frequently in larger doses until they're essentially functional addicts who can't sleep without it. The dosing is dangerously imprecise. Take as needed is the standard instruction which leaves customers to self-medicate with a substance that can absolutely kill them if they misjudge. You've heard story. Everyone in the profession has off accidental overdoses. Children given too much for teething pain. Adults taking a larger dose than usual because they're in desperate pain, not realizing their tolerance has changed. The line between effective dose and fatal dose shifts based on individual physiology, previous use, what they've eaten, how much they weigh. You're handing people a loaded gun and trusting them to figure out safe handling. Here's the quirky and horrifying detail that surprises modern people. Many Victorian households kept laudanum as casually as we keep aspirin, and accidental child poisonings were epidemic. Historians still argue whether the widespread availability of opium-based medicines represented humanitarian pain relief for an era with limited options, or whether it was essentially a societal addiction crisis that medicine normalized and profited from. You see both sides daily, the genuine relief it provides to people in chronic pain, and the obvious destruction of watching someone slowly disappear into dependency. Strychnine is particularly nerve-wracking to handle because it looks and behaves deceptively like other powders. It's white, crystalline, and if you weren't paying attention you could easily confuse it with something benign. The therapeutic dose for its supposed nerve-stimulating properties is perhaps 1 or 2 grains. The fatal dose is maybe 10 grains. That's the difference between a pinch and a slightly larger pinch, between medicine and murder. You measure it with hands that steady themselves through sheer willpower, double-checking the scales, adding grain by grain because there's no room for approximation. Mercury exposure is slower, more insidious. You handle it, constantly grinding calomel, preparing mercury ointments, measuring out doses of various mercury compounds for syphilis treatment. The substance accumulates in your body over months and years. That tremor developing in Mr. Pemberton's hands? Mercury poisoning, almost certainly. His teeth are starting to loosen. He's more irritable than he used to be. These are the occupational hazards nobody mentions during apprenticeship recruitment. You've started paying attention to your own hands, watching for the first signs of tremor. So far, nothing obvious. But you're also only a few months into this career. Ask again in 5 years. Ask again in 10. Every old apothecary you've met has some degree of tremor, some cognitive decline, some physical manifestation of decades spent handling toxic substances without adequate protection, because adequate protection doesn't really exist yet. The back room, where you store the most concentrated compounds, has taken on an almost sacred quality in your mind. You enter carefully, alert, treating it like the dangerous space it is. One spill, one broken bottle, one moment of clumsiness could mean exposure to substances that will make you violently ill or possibly kill you. The floor is stained from years of small spills and poor cleanup. You wonder how much poison has soaked into those floorboards, how much is slowly off-gassing into the air you breathe. Accidents happen despite precautions. Last month you knocked over a bottle of concentrated ammonia solution, and the fumes sent you staggering outside, eyes streaming, lungs burning. The week before, a bottle of iodine tincture shattered, covering your hands, and the counter in brown liquid that stained everything it touched and made your skin burn for hours afterward. These are the minor incidents. You don't talk about the close calls, the moments where your hand hovered over the wrong bottle before something instinct, luck, divine intervention made you pause and double-check. At night, you lie awake thinking about mistakes you might have made. Did you measure that arsenic dose correctly? Was the laudanum bottle properly labelled? Did you accidentally contaminate something? The what-ifs multiply in the darkness, and sleep comes slowly, if at all. This is your professional reality, surrounded by death in convenient bottles, one mistake away from tragedy, slowly poisoning yourself through the simple act of doing your job competently. The patent medicine salesman arrives on a Tuesday afternoon with a leather sample case and a smile that immediately makes you distrust everything he's about to say. His name is Mr. Caldwell, or so his business card claims, and he's representing the Dr. Core, Kilmer's Swamproot Kidney, Liver and Bladder Remedy Company. Yes, that's the actual name. No, you're not making it up. Welcome to the patent medicine industry, where truth in advertising is merely a suggestion. Guaranteed to cure everything from dropsy to diabetes, he announces, pulling bottles from his case with the flourish of a stage magician. The bottles are gorgeous embossed glass, colourful labels featuring pastoral scenes and impressive-looking medical diagrams. They're far more attractive than your hand-labelled brown bottles. Flying off shelves in Philadelphia, Boston, New York. Your customers are already asking for it, guaranteed. Mr. Pemberton emerges from the back room, wiping his hands on his apron. His expression suggests he's had this conversation before and didn't enjoy it the first time. "What's in it?" he asks flatly. Mr. Caldwell's smile doesn't waver. Proprietary blend of natural ingredients. Trade secret, you understand, but completely safe and remarkably effective. So, alcohol and maybe some herbs, Mr. Serbs? Mr. Rill, Pemberton translates. How much alcohol? Well-preserved formula, Mr. Caldwell deflects. Shelf-stable. Long-lasting. Customers love the convenience and no mixing, no measuring. Just take a spoonful and feel the difference. You watch this negotiation with growing discomfort. The patent medicine is almost certainly useless a bottle of alcohol, sugar water, and enough botanical extracts to justify calling it medicine. But, Mr. Stett, Caldwell is right about one thing. Customers are asking for these products. They've seen the advertisements in newspapers, heard testimonials from neighbours, been seduced by promises of miracle cures that require no effort beyond opening a bottle. The mainstream historical fact everyone learns is that patent medicines were massive business in the 19th century, a virtually unregulated industry that made fortunes by selling attractively packaged placebos with wildly exaggerated claims. The term patent was misleading. Most weren't actually patented because that would require revealing their formulas. They just sounded official and impressive, which was the entire point. Mr. Pemberton negotiates terms while you pretend to organize shelves. He'll stock the swamp root remedy because refusing means customers will simply buy it elsewhere, and he'd rather capture that revenue than lose it to competitors. But you can see the resignation in his shoulders, the quiet compromise of professional standards for commercial reality. This is how it works. You sell the nonsense alongside the semi-legitimate remedies, and customers can't tell the difference because everything in the shop is equally unproven. Your shelves gradually accumulate these patent medicines. Dr. Williams's pink pills for pale people, which are pink, you'll grant them that, though whether they help pale people is extremely questionable. Lydia E. Pinkham's vegetable compound for female complaints, basically alcohol and herbs, marketed with testimonials from women who definitely weren't paid for their enthusiasm. Carter's little liver pills, which probably do nothing for your liver, but definitely help Carter's bank account. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup for teething babies. This one actually works because it's loaded with morphine, which is technically soothing in the sense that drugged babies stop crying. Here's the quirky and somewhat disturbing detail. Many patent medicines contain significant amounts of cocaine, opium, or alcohol without listing these ingredients on the label. They worked, in a sense, because they got customers high or drunk or both. Historians still argue whether patent medicine manufacturers were deliberately deceptive or whether the line between medicine and recreational substance was just fundamentally blurrier in the 19th century when regulation didn't exist and nobody had established clear categories. You wrestle with the ethics daily. A mother comes in asking for something to help her colicky baby sleep. You could compound a careful, measured dose of something relatively safe. Or you could hand her Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, which she's seen advertised, which her neighbour swears by, which will absolutely work because it's drugging her infant into unconsciousness. The first option requires explaining, measuring, monitoring. The second option is 3 seconds of transaction and guaranteed customer satisfaction. Which do you choose? The patent medicines undermine everything you're learning about. Careful compounding. You spend hours grinding ingredients to exact specifications, measuring doses grain by grain, following recipes with meticulous attention to detail. Meanwhile, these mass-produced bottles with their secret formulas and outrageous claims sell faster because they're convenient, colourful, and backed by aggressive marketing campaigns you can't possibly match. It's disheartening to watch your careful work get ignored while bottles of alcoholic sugar water fly off the shelves. The advertising is what really gets you. The newspaper ads feature dramatic testimonials. I was on death's door until Dr. Tor. Kilmer's miraculous formula restored my vitality, accompanied by illustrations of robust, healthy people crediting their entire life success to regular consumption of whatever proprietary swill is being promoted this week. You read these ads and want to scream about the absurdity, but customers believe them. They trust printed words more than your informed explanations. Mr. Pemberton has developed a compromise position. He stocks the patent medicines, but subtly steers customers toward the ones that are at least relatively harmless. This one's very popular, he'll say about a remedy that's mostly alcohol and won't actually help, but also probably won't hurt. When someone asks for a genuinely dangerous patent medicine, the ones with undisclosed mercury or arsenic will sometimes claim to be out of stock and suggest alternatives. It's not honest exactly, but it's harm reduction dressed as inventory management. You're learning to make similar judgments. When a customer insists on a specific patent medicine you know is useless, you sell it without comment. When they're open to suggestions, you might guide them toward your own compounds that at least have some rational basis. When they're asking for something that could hurt them, you develop strategic amnesia about whether you carry it. The profit margins tell their own story. A patent medicine bottle costs you 20 cents wholesale and sells for $1.80 profit for literally pouring from one container to another. Your carefully compounded prescriptions might earn 30 cents after accounting for ingredients, labor, and time. The math is clear. Selling patent medicines is more profitable than being a competent apothecary. This is why half the shops in town are transitioning from compounding to retail, from craftsmanship to commerce. Remember that ledger from your first day? Increasingly, its pages show patent medicine sales dominating the revenue. Mr. Pemberton's custom compounds are becoming specialty items, expensive luxuries for customers who can afford personalized care. Everyone else buys the bottled promises with their colorful labels and impossible claims. You're complicit now. Every time you hand over a bottle of miracle tonic, you're participating in a system that prioritizes marketing over medicine, profit over efficacy. It feels like betrayal of the careful training you're receiving, but it's also how the shop stays solvent, how Mr. Pemberton pays your wages, how the business survives in an increasingly competitive market. At night, you wonder when you stop noticing the contradiction. The leech jar sits on a shelf in the back room and you've developed a complicated relationship with its inhabitants. They're slimy, disturbingly active, and you're responsible for keeping them alive and healthy until someone needs their blood-draining services. This was not in the job description you imagined, but here you are, changing their water, checking their condition, and occasionally getting bitten because leeches have opinions about being handled. The jar itself is ceramic, roughly the size of a large pickle container, with a perforated lid that allows air circulation while preventing escape. Inside, perhaps 24 leeches writhe in murky water that you change every other day. They're Hirudo medicinalis, European medicinal leeches, dark greenish-brown with lighter stripes, each about 3 inches long when relaxed, but capable of stretching to twice that when feeding. They're surprisingly strong, their muscular bodies gripping your fingers with unexpected force when you're transferring them to fresh water. They're particular about their environment. Mr. Pemberton warned during your first week, too warm and they die, too cold and they become sluggish. The water must be clean but not too clean. They need some organic matter but not enough to foul. And they won't feed if they're stressed, which makes them useless, which makes customers angry. You've learned that leeches are, improbably, pickier than most customers. They prefer certain blood types. Nobody knows why, but some people attract eager feeding while others get complete rejection. They need to be properly hungry, but not starved. They should be stored away from light, but not in complete darkness. You're essentially running a miniature leech spa, catering to the preferences of invertebrates who exist solely to drink blood and occasionally swim in unsettling wave-like motions that make your skin crawl. The mainstream historical fact everyone learns is that bloodletting was one of the most common medical procedures throughout the 19th century, based on the theory that many illnesses resulted from excess or corrupted blood that needed removal. Leeches were considered the gentler option compared to the more dramatic surgical bloodletting, and they had the advantage of injecting anticoagulant saliva that promoted continued bleeding after they detached. Your bloodletting equipment occupies its own drawer, instruments that look vaguely medieval and feel disturbingly purposeful. There are spring-loaded lancet small blades that snap forward when triggered, creating quick incisions for blood flow. You've got scarificators, which are essentially multiple small blades arranged to create several cuts simultaneously, looking like torture devices disguised as medical tools. Cupping glasses of various sizes, meant to be heated and applied to skin to create suction that draws blood to the surface. Thumb lancets for smaller, more controlled incisions. Each instrument is sharp, precise, and deeply uncomfortable to handle if you think too much about their purpose. You maintain these tools with meticulous care. The blades need regular sharpening. Dull lancets cause more pain and ragged wounds. Everything gets cleaned with alcohol after each use, though the concept of true sterilization doesn't exist yet and won't for another few decades. You're working with whatever understanding of cleanliness seemed reasonable in the 1800s, which is to say, better than nothing, but far from adequate by modern standards. The theory behind bloodletting is rooted in humoral medicine, the ancient belief that health depends on balancing four bodily humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much blood, or blood that's become overheated or corrupted, supposedly causes fever, inflammation, and various other complaints. Removing some restores balance. It's elegant, systematic, and almost completely wrong, but neither you nor your customers know that yet. The theory makes intuitive sense. Person seems overly flushed and hot. Removing blood should cool them down. Person has pounding headache. Reducing blood volume should reduce pressure. The logic is consistent, even if the underlying assumptions are flawed. Here's the quirky detail that surprises people. Leech therapy was considered more scientific and sophisticated than manual bloodletting because leeches were self-limiting. They'd feed until full and then drop off naturally, whereas manual cutting required judgment about how much blood to remove. Historians still argue whether leeches actually provided any therapeutic benefit beyond placebo effect, or whether the anticoagulant in their saliva might have had some unexpected medicinal properties that offset the bloodletting damage. Your first experience applying leeches was memorably unpleasant. Mrs. Crawford came in with complaints of headache and flushed complexion, classic bloodletting indications. Mr. Pemberton handled the procedure while you observed, trying not to show your squeamishness. He selected 3 plump leeches from the jar, rinsed them briefly, and applied them to her temples and behind her ear. They attached immediately, their small mouths creating suction as they began feeding. "You'll feel a slight sting," Mr. Pemberton assured her, which was diplomatic phrasing for, "This creature is now drinking your blood through tiny cutting teeth." Mrs. Winterst Crawford sat stoically while the leeches engorged, their bodies swelling visibly as they fed. After perhaps 20 minutes, they detached naturally, falling into the small bowl Mr. Pemberton held ready. The bite sites continued bleeding freely, that anticoagulant saliva at work so. He applied small bandages and instructed her to keep them clean. She paid, thanked him, and left apparently satisfied with the treatment. You stood there processing the fact that you'd just witnessed medieval medicine presented as modern therapy, and everyone involved considered it perfectly normal, reasonable, and effective. Now you perform these procedures yourself, though you still feel slightly ridiculous doing it. You've developed a technique for handling the leeches confidently despite your personal distaste to customers shouldn't see hesitation from their medical provider, even when that provider is secretly grossed out by the treatment method. You select appropriately hungry leeches, apply them to the indicated sites, monitor the feeding, and handle the aftermath with professional calm. The cupping is somehow worse than the leeches. You heat the glass cups with a small flame, creating a vacuum as they cool, then apply them to skin. The suction draws blood toward the surface, creating angry red circles that look like circular bruises. Sometimes you combine this with scarification, making small cuts before applying the cups so that actual blood draws into the glass. It's dramatic, uncomfortable for the patient, and you're never quite certain it's helping anything except your employment prospects. Remember those trembling hands you've been watching for signs of mercury poisoning? They're steady as stone when handling lancets or applying leeches. Somehow, your body knows that bloodletting procedures require absolute steadiness, and your nervous system overrides any tremor. It's the one time you feel genuinely confident in your technical skills, even though you're increasingly doubtful about the underlying medical theory. You've got a regular customer, Mr. Phillips, who comes in quarterly for preventive bloodletting because he's convinced it maintains his health. Each time you remove perhaps 8 ounces of blood using the lancet and cupping method, and each time he reports feeling lighter and clearer afterward. Is it helping? Probably not. Is it hurting? Hopefully not enough to matter. Is he satisfied with the service? Absolutely, which means you've successfully performed medicine as defined by your era, regardless of whether it aligns with actual biological reality. The used leeches bloated and satisfied after feeding go into a separate recovery jar where they'll digest for weeks before being ready to feed again. A leech can survive months between feedings, which makes them economical if you can maintain them properly. You've lost a few to poor water conditions or mysterious leech illnesses, and Mr. Cole, Pemberton, was genuinely annoyed about the waste. Those cost money, he reminded you, as if you'd carelessly killed expensive livestock rather than blood-sucking worms. At night, you think about the contradiction between your increasingly sophisticated understanding of materia medica and the essentially medieval practice of deliberate blood removal. You're learning chemistry, studying careful formulation, measuring substances with scientific precision, and then you're heating glass cups and attaching parasites to people's skin. The cognitive dissonance is substantial, but you're learning to hold both realities simultaneously. Medicine is part science, part tradition, and part theatre. The leeches are definitely theatre. The prescription arrives via a messenger boy who looks about 12 and utterly disinterested in the medical drama folded in his hand. You unfold the paper with appropriate professional gravity, and your heart immediately sinks. Dr. Harrison's handwriting looks like a spider died in an inkwell and then was dragged across the page by a strong wind. The Latin abbreviations are, there you can identify RX at the top, which at least confirms this is actually a prescription. But the rest is archaeological work requiring interpretation, guesswork, and possibly divine intervention. Cap, something. Tear in die, you mutter, squinting at the scrawl. Capiat let the patient take. Tear in die 3 times daily. Good start. But the actual medication? That's where Dr. Harrison's penmanship truly shines in its incomprehensibility. It might say pulv, ipecac, or possibly pulv, opium, or conceivably pulv. Illegible squiggle that could be anything. The difference between these matters enormously, as you've learned from that uncomfortable incident where you guessed wrong and gave someone an emetic when they needed pain relief. Mr. Pemberton glances over your shoulder. Harrison, he says, identifying the handwriting style with the weary recognition of long experience. That's pulv, OPI powdered opium. The loop on the P is his signature flourish. Took me 3 years to crack his particular code. He returns to his own work, leaving you with the revelation that each doctor has their own cryptographic system masquerading as handwriting, and you're expected to become fluent in all of them. The Latin abbreviations are their own special nightmare. Medical Latin in the 19th century is less a standardized language and more a collection of traditional shortcuts that everyone learns slightly differently and uses inconsistently. S means half semis. AA means of echana. QS means sufficient, quantity quantum sufficit. T means let there be made fiat. GGT means dropsgatai. You're essentially learning a dead language's pharmaceutical dialect while simultaneously trying to run a business and not kill anyone. The apothecary's weight system deserves its own circle of hell. It's not metric that won't become standard for decades. It's not even the regular imperial system with pounds and ounces. No, you're working with apothecary's measurements, grains, scruples, drams, ounces and pounds, but in proportions that make no intuitive sense if you were raised with normal human mathematics. 20 grains equal 1 scruple. 3 scruples equal 1 dram. 8 drams equal 1 ounce. 12 ounces equal 1 pound. Why? Because medieval pharmaceutical tradition said so, and apparently nobody thought to simplify it in the intervening centuries. Converting between these measurements is your daily mental exercise. A prescription calls for X of morphine. That's 10 grains, which is, you calculate frantically, about 2/3 of a gram in modern terms. Not that anyone's using grams yet. Another prescription wants GI 2 drams of something. The symbols themselves are baroque. For scruple, joule; for dram; for ounce. You're not reading medical instructions. You're deciphering hieroglyphics that control whether someone lives or dies. The mainstream historical fact that drives medical historians to despair is that prescription errors were incredibly common in the 19th century, partly because the measurement system was needlessly complex, and partly because doctors' handwriting was universally terrible. The combination of illegible scripts and complicated conversions meant that even competent apothecaries regularly made mistakes. Your professional anxiety about misreading prescriptions isn't paranoia. It's justified caution based on systemic problems nobody's bothering to fix. Dr. Mitchell's prescriptions are your nemesis. He writes in a cramped, minuscule hand that requires holding the paper up to the lamp and squinting until your eyes water. His Latin is technically correct, but uses archaic abbreviations you have to look up in Mr. Stare, Pemberton's reference books, and he has opinions about exact proportions that he expresses in fractions. It, of this, S of that, measurements that require you to divide grains or scruples into portions your scales can barely detect. You've started dreading his messenger's arrival. Then there's the delightful ambiguity built into many prescriptions. Tinct, opii, QS pro dolore, tincture of opium, sufficient quantity for pain. What's sufficient? How much pain? How large is the patient? How often should they take it? The prescription assumes you'll exercise professional judgment to fill in these rather important details, which would be reassuring if you felt particularly qualified to make life and death dosing decisions based on minimal information. Here's the quirky detail that modern pharmacists would find horrifying. Many 19th century doctors deliberately wrote prescriptions vaguely to prevent apothecaries from knowing the exact formula, supposedly protecting their professional secrets. This meant you were expected to compound medications while being intentionally kept partially ignorant of the full treatment plan. Historians still argue whether this secrecy actually protected patients or whether it just created additional opportunities for dangerous miscommunication in a system already full of hazards. You've developed strategies for managing uncertainty. If a prescription is genuinely indecipherable, you send the messenger back with a polite note requesting clarification, though this makes doctors irritable and suggests incompetence on your part. If the handwriting is merely difficult, you make your best guess and prepare the most conservative version of what might be intended. If the dosing seems dangerously high, you'll sometimes adjust it slightly downward and hope the doctor doesn't notice or that the patient benefits from your unauthorized modification. The weight conversions require constant vigilance. You keep a conversion chart posted near your scales, but you've mostly memorized the relationships through sheer repetition. 60 grains equal 1 dram. 480 grains equal 1 ounce. Your brain now thinks in grains automatically, assessing substances by their weight in these tiny units that mean nothing to the outside world, but everything in pharmaceutical precision. Some doctors are mercifully clear. Dr. Adams prints his prescriptions in careful block letters, uses standard abbreviations, and includes patient instructions in plain English. His prescriptions are a joy to fill, no guessing, no squinting, no sending messengers back for clarification. But Dr. Adams is the exception. Most physicians seem to believe that legibility is somehow unprofessional, that true medical authority requires handwriting that actively resists comprehension. The prescription book where you record every filled order is your safety net and potential legal evidence. You copy each prescription exactly or as exactly as you can decipher it. Note the date, the doctor's name, the patient's name, and what you actually dispensed. If someone becomes ill or dies after taking your compound, this ledger becomes your defense. I filled what the prescription said, or I interpreted the illegible scrawl as best I could. The book is evidence of due diligence, though it's also a record of every time you guessed wrong. Remember that mortar and pestle that's given you such impressive arm muscles? You're grinding substances to exact specifications based on measurements you decoded from handwriting that barely qualifies as written language. The absurdity of this hits you some afternoons. You're performing careful, precise pharmaceutical work based on instructions that required cryptographic skills to interpret. It's like being asked to build a bridge while the engineering plans are written in code by someone with Parkinson's. You've started recognizing certain doctors by their prescription style even before seeing their signatures. Dr. Wellington always prescribes calomel for everything. You can tell his prescriptions by the frequency of mercury compounds regardless of condition. Dr. Foster is obsessed with bloodletting referrals. Dr. Chen uses unusual botanical combinations that suggest actual thought about individual patient needs. The prescriptions reveal personalities, priorities, and sometimes the limits of each doctor's knowledge. By 6 months into your apprenticeship, you're fluent in medical Latin, competent with apothecary's weights, and capable of deciphering most doctors' handwriting. But you never quite lose that small spike of anxiety when unfolding a new prescription, never fully trust that you've interpreted everything correctly, never stop double-checking your conversions before measuring potentially lethal substances. The system works, mostly, held together by experience, caution, and the fact that many remedies probably don't do much anyway, so dosing errors matter less than they should. His name is Thomas, he's 16, and he's standing in exactly the spot where you stood, 6 months, uggo-eyed, overwhelmed, and trying not to show it. Mr. Pemberton has decided you're competent enough to train an apprentice, which is either a vote of confidence or evidence that he's getting tired of doing all the teaching himself. Either way, you're now responsible for transforming this nervous teenager into someone who can handle poisons without killing people. No pressure, this is the mortar and pestle, you explain, hearing your own voice echo Mr. Pemberton's patient but firm tone from months ago. You'll be using it constantly. The motion is circular, firm but not aggressive. You're persuading the substance to become powder, not attacking it. You demonstrate, grinding some relatively harmless dried chamomile, your movements smooth and practiced in ways that feel almost foreign. When did you become competent at this? Thomas nods seriously, takes the pestle, and immediately proves that competence isn't transferable through observation. His grinding is jerky, uneven, pushing powder into the mortar's corners rather than circulating it properly. You watch him struggle with the same motion you struggled with, fighting the urge to just take it back and do it yourself because teaching requires patience you're not certain you possess. Your wrist is too stiff, you point out, reaching over to adjust his grip. Let the pestle do the work. Find the rhythm. He tries again, marginally better, and you suppress the sigh that wants to escape because apparently teaching means recycling Mr. Pemberton's exact phrases and hoping they work on the next generation. The Materia Medica book sits on the counter between you, that same leather-bound tome that haunted your early weeks. You need to memorize this, you tell Thomas, watching his face fall exactly the way yours did. Start with the common substances, the ones we use daily. Latin name, common name, primary uses, contraindications, proper dosing. Mr. Pemberton will quiz you randomly, and he doesn't accept excuses. You're channeling your master so precisely that it's slightly disturbing. Thomas picks up a bottle of calomel. This is mercury chloride, he ventures, reading the label slowly. Correct. We use it as a purgative. It's also terrible for your kidneys with prolonged exposure, but that won't stop doctors from prescribing it constantly. You're already teaching him the dual knowledge system, the official pharmaceutical facts, and the quiet skepticism that comes from watching remedies fail. He looks confused by this contradiction, and you remember being equally confused before accepting that medicine contains multitudes of conflicting truths. The mainstream historical fact that shapes your teaching approach is that pharmaceutical apprenticeships were essentially on-the-job training with minimal formal oversight. You learned by doing, by making mistakes, by gradually absorbing knowledge through repetition and correction. There was no standardized curriculum, no national examination, just masters passing knowledge to apprentices in an unbroken chain stretching back centuries. You're now a link in that chain, responsible for not breaking it through incompetence. Teaching reveals gaps in your own knowledge you didn't know existed. Thomas asks why camphor helps with congestion, and you realize you have no idea beyond "that's what the books say" and customers expect it. You're parroting information without understanding mechanisms, just like Mr. Sear. Pemberton sometimes does, just like probably every apothecary throughout history has done when pressed for explanations that don't exist yet. Here's the quirky detail that surprises people about pharmaceutical apprenticeships. Many apprentices were essentially unpaid labor for the first year or two, expected to work long hours in exchange for training that might or might not be comprehensive. Thomas is luckier. Mr. Pemberton pays a small wage from day one, but you've met apprentices at other shops who work 16-hour days for nothing but the promise of eventual knowledge. Historians still argue whether this system represented valuable skills training or exploitative labor practices, and honestly, watching Thomas scrub the floors at 6 in the morning suggests it's probably both. You teach him the morning routine, the lighting of lamps, the checking of temperature-sensitive compounds, the sweeping and straightening that transforms the shop from sleeping space to professional operation. He's clumsy, knocking into shelves, fumbling with the lamp wicks, but you remember your own clumsy beginnings and force yourself to be patient. Patience, your learning, is a professional skill nobody mentioned you'd need. The first time Thomas grinds something incorrectly and you have to make him start over, you hear, "Mr. Start." Pemberton's voice coming from your own mouth. Precision matters. If you're going to give someone medicine, at least give them the exact wrong amount consistently. Thomas looks mortified, starts over, and you feel the strange weight of being someone's teacher rather than someone's student. The power dynamic has shifted without you quite noticing. When? You teach him to read doctors' prescriptions, starting with Dr. Adams's mercifully legible scripts before gradually introducing him to Dr. Harrison's cryptographic nightmares. This could be pulv, poppies, or possibly pulv. Right, Thomas benches, squinting at a particularly difficult prescription. It's opium, you confirm. See that loop on the P? That's Harrison's signature flourish. You'll learn to recognize each doctor's style. You're passing on the same decoding skills, Mr. C coding skills. Pemberton taught you, perpetuating a system where medical communication requires expertise in handwriting, interpretation, alongside pharmaceutical knowledge. Teaching the scales requires extraordinary patience. Thomas's hand shakes while measuring nervousness rather than mercury poisoning. At least for now, and you have to talk him through steadying his breathing, waiting for the balance to settle, adding grain by grain until equilibrium. It gets easier, you assure him, remembering your own shaking hands and wondering if you're lying or offering genuine comfort. The poison handling talk happens in week 2. You show him the arsenic, the strychnine, the mercury compounds, explaining each one's dangers with the same gravity Mr. Aero Pemberton used with you. Thomas goes slightly pale, which seems appropriate. Respect them, you emphasize. They'll kill you, kill customers, destroy your career. Handle them like the dangerous substances they are. You sound older than you feel, more experienced than 6 months of work justifies, but Thomas nods seriously and you hope the warning lands. Remember that first customer who terrified you with their desperate trust? Thomas experiences his first solo interaction in week 3, a regular customer asking for a common remedy. You hover nearby, ready to intervene, watching him fumble through the transaction with sweaty nervousness. He measures correctly, wraps the powder properly, makes change without error. The customer leaves satisfied. Thomas exhales shakily, and you feel absurdly proud, like you've accomplished something meaningful by watching someone else not fail. You'll get used to it, you tell him, which might be the first genuine lie you've told as a teacher. You haven't gotten used to it. The responsibility still weighs heavily. The uncertainty still keeps you awake, but saying so feels like failing your teaching role. So you project confidence you don't quite possess, hoping he absorbs competence through exposure to your performance of knowing what you're doing. By month 2, Thomas can handle basic compounding, recognize common substances by sight and smell, and navigate the shop without constantly bumping into things. He's developing the stoop from low ceilings, the stained hands from constant chemical exposure, the particular exhaustion that comes from standing behind a counter all day, mediating between people's suffering and inadequate remedies. You're creating another apothecary, another link in the chain, another person who'll stand in this exact spot someday, teaching the next nervous 16-year-old how to grind powders and handle poisons. The cycle continues, knowledge passing from slightly less inexperienced to completely inexperienced, all of you hoping the chain doesn't break with someone's death. October arrives with the first real cold snap, and you watch Mr. Star. Pemberton's demeanor shift from the relatively relaxed summer vigilance to something approaching military preparedness. Winter's coming, he announces, which sounds dramatic until you realize he's not being poetish as warning you about the next 6 months of respiratory hell that's about to descend on your customer base. We need to stock up on expectorants, cough suppressants, fever reducers. And God help us if we run out of ipecac during croup season. The seasonal illness patterns become your calendar, more reliable than any almanac. November through March is respiratory season, endless parade of coughs, wheezes, congestion, and the wet, rattling sounds of lungs struggling against infection. Croup arrives first, targeting children with that distinctive barking cough that sends panicked mothers to your door at all hours. You prepare gallons of cough, seropipacac to help clear mucus, opium to suppress the cough, enough for sleep, honey, and lemon for throat comfort. Your hands smell permanently of camphor from the chest rubs you compound by the pound. Consumption, what you'll eventually learn to call tuberculosis, though that term hasn't quite caught on yet, is the winter constant. It's always present, but cold weather seems to worsen it, bringing the pale, thin, constantly coughing customers who need remedies you know won't cure them. Hard liver oil, which tastes exactly as awful as it sounds. Iron tonics to address the anemia. Opium-based cough suppressants to give them enough relief to sleep. You compound these medicines knowing you're treating symptoms rather than disease, providing comfort rather than cure, but comfort matters when cure isn't available. The mainstream historical fact that dominates winter pharmacy work is that respiratory infections killed enormous numbers of people in the 19th century, particularly children and the elderly, because effective treatments didn't exist yet. Antibiotics won't be discovered for another several decades. Germ theory is still being debated in medical journals. You're working with remedies based on centuries-old theory, hoping that symptom management keeps patients alive long enough for their own immune systems to win the fight. Pneumonia is your winter terror. When someone comes in with the combination of fever, chest pain, and difficulty breathing, you know they need a doctor, not an apothecary. But doctors cost money many families don't have, so you end up dispensing whatever you can: fever reducers, pain relievers, plasters to draw out the corrupt humours while privately praying the person survives. You've lost count of how many pneumonia customers you never saw again, whether because they recovered or because they died. Both options haunt you differently. By December, your shop smells like a perpetual medicine factory. The back room is filled with batches of cough syrup in various stages of preparation, jars of chest rub cooling to solid form, stacks of fever powder packets ready for dispensing. Thomas spends entire afternoons doing nothing but grinding ipecac root and measuring opium tincture. Your fingers are raw from constant washing. You're terrified of cross-contaminating remedies when you're handling this volume. Then spring arrives, briefly, bringing its own medical challenges. allergies that nobody quite understands or knows how to treat effectively, spring fevers of mysterious origin, the tail end of winter illnesses overlapping with the beginning of summer complaints. April and May are transition months where you're never quite sure what to stock heavily because the illness patterns are shifting under your feet. Summer is when the real anxiety begins. June's warming temperatures bring the first cases of summer complaint diarrhea, particularly in children, caused by contaminated food or water that nobody realizes is contaminated because germ theory hasn't been widely accepted yet. You stock up on opium preparations to slow the digestive system, chalk and other binding agents to firm things up, and hope that's enough. Sometimes it is. Sometimes parents return weeks later asking for something else, and you realize you're seeing the same child deteriorate because the actual problem bacterial infection from unsafe water isn't being addressed. Here's the quirky and deeply disturbing detail about 19th century summer illness. Childhood mortality rates from diarrheal diseases were so high that some families simply expected to lose children during summer months, budgeting for funerals as a routine expense. Historians still argue whether this fatalism was adaptive psychology in the face of unpreventable tragedy, or whether it represented a failure of society to prioritize public health infrastructure that could have saved thousands of lives. Cholera is the summer nightmare that keeps you awake. It appears in waves, epidemic years, when the disease sweeps through cities leaving bodies in its wake. The symptoms are horrifying. Violent diarrhea and vomiting that dehydrate patients so rapidly they can die within hours. Your remedies are essentially useless against it. Opium to slow the purging, astringents to bind the bowels, prayers that the patient's constitution is strong enough. During cholera years, you compound vast quantities of medicines you know won't work while watching the death toll climb. You learn to recognize the early signs in customers. The rice water stool appearance in diarrhea, the rapid onset, the severe muscle cramps. When someone presents with obvious cholera symptoms, you dispense your remedies, but also strongly urge them to seek medical care, knowing that medical care in cholera cases mostly means making the patient comfortable while they either recover or die. The medical profession is as helpless as you are against cholera, but at least doctors can provide the illusion of authoritative intervention. Dysentery follows similar summer patterns, less dramatically fatal than cholera, but still dangerous, particularly for children and elderly customers. Your standard treatment protocol involves opium for pain and to slow intestinal movement, plus various astringent compounds. You've noticed that some remedies seem more effective than others, but you can't identify why. Nobody can, because the bacterial causes won't be understood for decades. The inventory planning becomes a chess game against seasonal illness patterns. In August, while summer diseases still dominate, you're already preparing for winter respiratory season because some supplies need ordering months in advance. That cinchona bark for quinine, imported from South America with shipping times that require planning around seasonal demand spikes. The opium, you need bulk supplies before winter because you'll burn through it in cough remedies and pain management. The ipecac, the camphor, the various herbs and mineral seach needs anticipating based on cyclical patterns you're learning through experience. Remember Thomas from your last lesson? He's learning these seasonal rhythms now, watching the customer flow change with weather patterns, noting which remedies fly off shelves in different months. Why do we stock so much ipecac in October, he asks, and you explain the coming respiratory season, teaching him to think ahead, to prepare before the crisis arrives, rather than scrambling to meet demand with depleted supplies. Some customers become seasonal regulars. Mrs. O'Brien appears every November with requests for croup medicine, her children's annual respiratory struggles as predictable as frost. Mr. Chen needs his consumption remedies refreshed each winter when his chronic cough worsens. The Sullivan family requires dysentery treatments every July like clockwork. You learn these patterns, anticipate their arrivals, sometimes have their usual remedies prepared before they even ask. The shop's rhythm follows these cycles: frantic winter mornings, compounding cough remedies, anxious summer afternoons during cholera scare years, brief spring and fall respites when illness patterns shift. You're living inside a biological calendar where human suffering marks the seasons more reliably than any weather patterns. You stand behind the counter explaining to Mrs. Henderson that her rheumatism is caused by an excess of cold phlegmatic humours in her joints, which requires warming, drying remedies to restore balance. You say this with complete confidence, as if you're stating verified scientific fact, rather than repeating a medical theory that's been wrong for approximately 2,000 years. She nods, trusts you, and pays for the pepper and mustard liniment you've prepared. Everyone in this transaction believes you know what you're doing. Nobody realizes you're all operating on fundamentally flawed assumptions about how human bodies work. Humoral theory underpins everything you do, so deeply embedded in medical thinking that questioning it would be like questioning whether the sun rises in the east. The body contains 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These correspond to 4 qualities: hot, cold, wet, and dry. Health is perfect balance. Illness is imbalance. Treatment means identifying which humour is excessive or deficient and prescribing substances to counteract it. It's elegant, systematic, and almost completely wrong, but it won't be fully overturned for decades yet, so you work within its framework as if it's truth rather than tradition. A feverish patient has too much hot, wet blood, so you cool them with refrigerants, dry them with astringents, maybe remove some blood through cupping or leeches to reduce the excess directly. A patient with persistent cough and pale complexion clearly suffers from excess cold, moist phlegm. You prescribe warming expectorants to heat and dry the system. Someone complains of irritability and digestive upset. Obviously too much hot, dry, yellow bile. You recommend cooling, moistening foods and medicines. The logic is internally consistent even when it's externally nonsense. Mr. Pemberton teaches you to read patients through this humoral lens. Look at his complexion: ruddy, florid, sanguine temperament, excess blood, probably prone to inflammation and fever. Recommend cooling diet. Avoid heating spices. Or, see how pale and sluggish she appears? Phlegmatic constitution. Needs warming stimulants, more vigorous living. You're essentially practicing personality typing based on medieval physiological theory, and it shapes every diagnostic decision you make. The mainstream historical fact that medical historians emphasize is that humoral theory dominated Western medicine from ancient Greece through the 19th century precisely because it was unfalsifiable. Any treatment failure could be explained by incorrect humour identification, improper remedy selection, or the patient's constitutional weakness. It was a closed, logical system that accommodated all evidence, which made it intellectually durable, even as it was therapeutically questionable. Miasma theory adds another layer to your medical worldview. Disease comes from bad air miasmas rising from swamps, sewers, rotting matter, and crowded spaces. You can literally smell disease approaching, or, so the theory goes. That's why cities reek during epidemics. That's why illness clusters in poor neighbourhoods with inadequate sanitation. The foul air carries corrupting influences that enter the body through breathing and open pores, creating imbalance and illness. This theory actually produces some useful public health outcomes, even though the underlying mechanism is wrong. Cleaning streets reduces disease, not because it eliminates miasma, but because it removes sewage that harbours bacteria. But nobody knows about bacteria yet, so they credit the miasma removal. Opening windows and improving ventilation helps patients recover, not because fresh air dispels miasmas, but because better air circulation reduces pathogen concentration. You're getting some things right by accident, through wrong theories that happen to recommend beneficial actions. Here's the quirky detail that surprises modern people. Many 19th century medical practitioners were absolutely certain they could distinguish between different types of miasma based on smell, alone marsh miasma versus sewer miasma versus crowd miasma, each supposedly causing distinct disease patterns. Historians still argue whether this represented sophisticated environmental observation with wrong interpretation, or whether it was essentially elaborate confabulation where practitioners invented distinctions to support their theoretical framework. You recommend protective measures based on miasma theory, burning aromatic substances to purify air, hence all that camphor and vinegar, wearing pomanders or scent bags when venturing into diseased neighborhoods, avoiding night air, which is somehow more miasmatic than day air for reasons that make sense if you don't think about them too hard. These recommendations feel scientific, sound authoritative, and probably don't hurt anything even if they don't help much either. Counter-irritant theory guides many of your treatments and makes even less sense than humoral imbalance. The idea is that you can cure internal ailments by creating external irritation that draws the disease outward or distracts the body's vital forces. Mustard plasters that blister skin to treat pneumonia, blistering agents applied near inflamed joints, those leeches and cupping sessions that deliberately create wounds. You're essentially proposing that you can treat disease by adding more suffering in a different location, and somehow this is standard medical practice. Remember that mortar and pestle work that's defined your daily routine? You're grinding substances whose therapeutic rationale is based on medieval sympathetic magic dressed up as pharmaceutical science. Red substances for blood disorders, yellow substances for liver complaints, white substances for phlegm problems, substances that are hot to taste treat cold conditions, bitter substances purge excess bile. There's an underlying assumption that nature provides remedies that signal their purposes through appearance and taste, which is poetic but not actually how chemistry works. The counterbalancing act becomes your standard approach. Patient presents as too hot and dry, prescribe cool, moist remedies. Too cold and wet, warm, dry treatments. You're constantly seeking equilibrium through opposition, as if human health were a perpetual seesaw requiring careful balancing rather than a complex biological system with specific causes for specific ailments. You dose medicines based on perceived strength of constitution rather than body weight or measured physiological parameters. A robust, sanguine patient can handle stronger remedies. A delicate, nervous patient needs gentler treatment. These assessments are entirely subjective, based on appearance and manner, yet they determine whether someone receives a therapeutic dose or a toxic one. It's remarkable how often you're wrong without immediate consequences simply because many medicines don't do much anyway. The diagnostic process is theatrical feeling pulses, examining tongue color, assessing skin tone, asking about dreams and appetite. You're gathering information that fits into your theoretical framework, ignoring data that doesn't, and confidently pronouncing diagnoses based on pattern matching against humoral templates you've memorized. Excess bilious humors complicated by miasmatic exposure, you might declare, sounding authoritative while essentially saying nothing meaningful. Thomas asks you one afternoon why bloodletting helps so many different conditions. You give him the standard explanation about removing corrupt or excessive humors, about rebalancing the system, about the body's natural tendency toward equilibrium. He accepts this uncritically, as you did months ago, neither of you realizing that the real answer is it mostly doesn't help, sometimes makes things worse, and occasionally patients recover despite it rather than because of it. The gap between your confidence and your actual knowledge is vast, but admitting uncertainty isn't professionally viable. Customers need authority. They're paying for certainty in an uncertain world. So you provide it, wrapping inadequate treatments in confident explanations rooted in respected theory, and everyone collaborates in maintaining the fiction that medicine is more science than guesswork. At night, though, you sometimes wonder, that fever patient who recovered after you prescribed cooling remedies, would they have recovered anyway? That cough that responded to warming expectorants, was that the medicine or just time? You're developing a quiet skepticism that you can't voice professionally, a growing awareness that confidence and correctness aren't the same thing. But tomorrow you'll stand behind that counter again, explaining humoral imbalances and miasmatic exposures with unwavering authority, because that's the job. Mrs. Patterson returns on a Thursday afternoon, ostensibly for more cough syrup for her son, but you recognize the hesitation in her approach, the way she waits until the shop is empty before really speaking. "He's doing better," she says about the child, then lowers her voice. "But my husband, he's been having these pains in his chest. He won't see a doctor. Says we can't afford it. I thought maybe—" She trails off, looking at you with the kind of desperate hope that's become depressingly familiar. This is your actual job, beyond the grinding and measuring and poison handling. You're not just an apothecary. You're the person people trust with the truths they can't speak elsewhere. The confessor for medical anxieties, the counsellor for health concerns. They're too embarrassed or too poor to take to physicians, the first responder in a healthcare system with massive gaps. Mr. Patterson's chest pains probably need proper medical attention, but probably and need don't override, can't afford, so you're the compromise, the accessible option, the person who exists in the space between no help and proper help. "Bring him in tomorrow morning," you tell her quietly. "I'll examine him myself, see what might help." No charge for the consultation. You can't actually afford to provide free services, but you also can't send her away when chest pains in a middle-aged man could be anything from indigestion to imminent death. This is the bargain you've made with your community accessibility in exchange for responsibility you're not fully qualified to carry. The shop functions as an informal medical clinic for everyone who can't reach or afford the doctors who live in the better neighbourhoods or the next town over. You've set broken fingers using splints and hope, cleaned wounds that should probably be sutured, advised on childhood rashes, adult digestion problems, elderly weakness. None of this was in your training, but all of it is expected because when the nearest physician is 3 miles away and charges fees equivalent to a week's wages, you're the one people turn to. The mainstream historical fact that shapes your community role is that apothecaries often served as primary healthcare providers for working class and rural populations throughout the 19th century, filling the gap created by insufficient numbers of physicians and their concentration in wealthy urban areas. You're not replacing doctors exactly, you're providing the care that simply wouldn't exist otherwise, which makes you simultaneously essential and perpetually anxious about your limitations. But the medical role is only part of your community function. You're also, somewhat uncomfortably, the neighbourhood's information clearinghouse. People tell you things not just symptoms, but contexts, circumstances, the life details that surround their ailments. You know which families are struggling financially because they apologise for small purchases. You know which marriages are troubled because wives request sleeping tonics or nerve medicines with particular desperation. You know which men are drinking too much because their hands shake when they count coins. The shop becomes a confessional booth where people's vulnerabilities are laid bare in exchange for remedies. Mrs. Chen confides that her laudanum use has increased because her pain is worsening, but also because her son hasn't found work in months and the stress is unbearable. You adjust her refill schedule and mention carefully that you heard the textile mill might be hiring. This isn't medicine exactly, but it's caregiving in the broader sense, attending to the whole person rather than just their symptoms. Mr. Sullivan comes in for his wife's nerve tonic and lingers at the counter, eventually admitting that he's worried about his own health but feels guilty spending money on himself when the children need shoes. You prepare a general tonic at cost and suggest he stop by for a proper consultation when he can manage it. He won't pride and poverty make a stubborn combination. But you've planted the seed, maintained the relationship, kept the channel open for when crisis makes seeking help unavoidable. Here's the quirky detail that social historians love. Many 19th century apothecary shops served as informal social gathering places where men congregated to discuss news, politics, and gossip while ostensibly waiting for prescriptions. Your counter becomes a masculine social space, a respectable location for conversation that doesn't carry the moral stigma of taverns. Historians still argue whether this social function actually improved community health by making medical resources more accessible and comfortable, or whether it just provided another venue for idle time wasting while you're trying to work. You learn to navigate gossip with professional discretion. Yes, you know things about everyone's health and circumstances. No, you don't share that information even when directly asked. When Mrs. Henderson tries to extract details about the Patterson family's troubles, you deflect with practiced ease. Patient confidentiality, you say firmly, which isn't actually a legal requirement yet, but sounds official enough to shut down the fishing expedition. The discretion matters enormously for maintaining trust. People need to believe their secrets are safe, or they'll stop sharing necessary medical information. That delicate teenage girl who comes in requesting female remedies needs to trust you won't mention it to her parents standing 20 feet away at the grocer's. That gentleman seeking treatment for venereal disease needs certainty. You won't spread gossip about his condition. Your silence is as important as your pharmaceutical knowledge. The emergency responder role arrives without warning. A factory worker staggers in mid-afternoon with a hand crushed in machinery, blood soaking through a makeshift bandage, and suddenly you're performing urgent care with supplies meant for minor complaints. You clean the wound with carbolic acid, apply pressure to stop the bleeding, fashion a proper bandage, and strongly urge him to see a surgeon. He nods, but probably won't go because surgeons cost money and missing work costs money, and he's already calculating which financial disaster is more survivable. Remember that bell above the door that's marked your day since the beginning? Late one night it jangles urgently, and you stumble downstairs to find a terrified father whose child is burning with fever and struggling to breathe. The doctor won't come at this hour, or perhaps they tried and he wasn't home, so you're the midnight option. You prepare fever remedies, provide instructions for cool compresses, sit with them until the crisis passes or at least stabilizes. This is medicine at its most basic: presence, attention, whatever limited help you can offer when no one else is available. Your role extends beyond physical health into community cohesion. You know everyone's business, which makes you a connector mentioning job opportunities, suggesting helpful resources, facilitating informal support networks. You're the person who knows that the Jensen family has extra food and the Chen family needs it, that Mrs. Patterson is an experienced nurse who could help the Sullivans with their bedridden grandmother, that Mr. Henderson's anxiety might improve if he had purposeful work, and Mr. Chen's shop needs reliable help. The weight of all this knowledge, all this trust, all this responsibility sits heavy some evenings. You're 22 years old, trained for 6 months, and you're the person people depend on for medical care, emotional support, community connection, and crisis response. It's overwhelming when you let yourself think about it, so mostly you don't. You just show up each morning, unlock the door, light the lamps, and be present for whatever needs arrive. The new apothecary shop opens 3 streets over on a Tuesday morning, and Mr. Day morning, Pemberton receives the news with the grim expression of a general learning enemy troops have crossed the border. Mitchell's nephew, he says, peering at the advertisement in the newspaper, calls himself a pharmaceutical chemist rather than an apothecary. Yeah, modern terminology for the same work, but it sounds more scientific. He folds the paper with deliberate care. We'll need to be sharper. Better service, better prices, better reputation. Competition keeps us honest, but it also keeps us poor if we're not careful. You walk past the new establishment that afternoon, ostensibly running an errand but really conducting reconnaissance. The shop is larger than yours, with 3 front windows instead of 2. The shelving looks new, unstained by decades of chemical spills. A painted sign advertises "Modern Scientific Pharmacy Latest," advances in medical compounds. You peer through the window and see glass display cases that make your cramped counter look medieval by comparison. Your stomach sinks. This isn't just competition, it's a statement that your shop belongs to an older, shabbier era. The rivalry manifests in small, petty ways that would be amusing if your livelihood didn't depend on winning. Mitchell's Nephwis name is Edmund, and he's perhaps 5 years older than you Priest's. His common remedies slightly below your rates, forcing Mr. Stuher, Pemberton to match or lose customers. You respond by emphasizing personal service, remembering customer preferences, providing the kind of attention that comes from knowing someone's medical history rather than just processing their transactions. Egmond's shop is modern. Yours is familiar. Both matter, but to different customers. The professional pride becomes absurd sometimes. You've caught yourself criticizing Edmund's compounding technique to customers, mentioning casually that properly ground opium requires specific motions he probably hasn't mastered yet, implying his remedies might be inferior. You hear similar whispers coming back about your shop, that Pemberton's methods are old-fashioned, that the newer pharmaceutical approaches yield better results, that choosing the modern shop over the traditional one signals a customer's sophistication. It's like competing restaurants trash-talking each other's recipes, except instead of burnt dinner, the stakes involve whether someone lives or dies. The mainstream historical fact that explains this competitive intensity is that most 19th century towns could only support a limited number of apothecaries, so new entrants directly threatened existing shops' survival. It wasn't about market share in an expanding economy, it was about dividing a fixed pie where one shop's gain meant another's loss. Your competition with Edmund isn't friendly rivalry, it's economic warfare conducted through professional politeness. Then the travelling medicine show arrives in September, and suddenly Edmund's shop isn't your primary concern anymore. The show sets up in the town square with colourful wagons, a small stage, and a charismatic showman who calls himself Professor Thornton, despite having no medical credentials whatsoever. He's selling Dr. Thornton's miraculous vital restorative, which supposedly cures everything from consumption to baldness to marital dissatisfaction. The bottles are enormous, decorated with exotic imagery and priced at $1 each, expensive enough to seem valuable but cheaper than consulting a physician. Professor Thornton draws crowds with entertainment, juggling, musical performances, dramatic testimonials from audience plants who claim miraculous recoveries. People gather for the show, get caught up in the spectacle, and purchase bottles of what you're fairly certain is mostly alcohol and colouring. It's medicine as theatre, healthcare as carnival, and it's devastatingly effective at separating people from their money. You watch one of his performances, standing at the edge of the crowd with your arms crossed and your professional dignity wounded. He's making promises you'd never dare make, offering certainty about outcomes you know are uncertain, selling hope that's more potent than any actual remedy. And people believe him not despite the showmanship, but because of it. The entertainment validates the medicine in customers' minds. Your serious, sober shop can't compete with fire jugglers and testimonials. They'll be gone in a week, Mr. Pemberton says when you report back, trying to sound unconcerned. Travelling shows always move on. The question is how much business they take with them and whether customers come back to us afterward or decide all medicine is equally fraudulent. Here's the quirky detail about travelling medicine shows. Many featured genuinely talented performers who used entertainment as the hook for product sales. The medicine was secondary to the show, which made them essentially advertising vehicles dressed as travelling circuses. Historians still argue whether these shows represented democratization of medical access by bringing remedies to rural areas, or whether they were purely exploitative operations that damaged public trust in legitimate pharmacy while providing no actual therapeutic benefit. But the grocery store might be your most insidious competitor. Old Mr. Branson has started carrying medicinal supplies, alongside his regular good spatent medicines, of course, but also some basic remedies like Epsom salts, castor oil, and cough drops. He's not claiming pharmaceutical expertise. He's just providing convenience, letting customers purchase medicine alongside flour and butter rather than making a separate trip to your shop. It's competition through accessibility rather than expertise, and it's surprisingly effective. He's not even measuring properly, you complain to Thomas, who's learned to nod sympathetically at your professional grievances. He's just pouring castor oil from a big jug into customer bottles. No precision, no care, no pharmaceutical standards. Thomas points out reasonably that castor oil probably doesn't require precision measuring. You glare at him. He's technically right, which makes it worse. Remember Mrs. Patterson from earlier sections, who trusted you with her family's health concerns. She mentions, apologetically, that she bought some cough drops at Branson's grocery because she was already there shopping. It wasn't about quality or trust, it was about convenience and not making 2 stops when one sufficed. You force a smile and assure her it's fine, but internally you're calculating how many customers you're losing to the simple fact that grocers are already where people shop. The competition forces improvements you resent needing to make. You extend evening hours to accommodate workers who can't visit during the day. You offer credit more liberally, even to customers whose payment history is questionable. You develop a more pleasant counter-manner, suppressing the sarcasm that comes naturally because Edmund's shop is reportedly so friendly and welcoming. You're becoming a better apothecary through competition, but you'd prefer to become better through personal growth rather than economic necessity. Professional associations should theoretically help there, are regional pharmacy groups meant to maintain standards and support members. But these gatherings often devolve into thinly veiled competitions about whose shop is more successful, whose compounding technique is superior, whose customer base is more loyal. You attend one meeting and leave feeling worse about your professional standing than before you arrived. Apparently, Edmund gives presentations about modern pharmaceutical advances that make your traditional methods sound positively medieval. The reputation wars are fought through whispers and implications rather than direct confrontation. You'd never publicly attack a competitor. That would be unprofessional. And besides, customers would see through obvious hostility. Instead, you cultivate subtle superiority. Some shops prioritize speed over accuracy, but we believe careful compounding is worth the extra time. Or, those travelling shows make impressive promises, though I prefer to be conservative about what remedies can realistically achieve. The clock strikes 7, and the last customer, Mr. Henderson, naturally, with yet another mysterious ailment, finally departs. You flip the door sign to closed, turn the lock, and lean against the doorframe for a moment, feeling the day's accumulated exhaustion settle into your bones like sediment. Your feet ache. Your back hurts from the perpetual stoop required by low ceilings. Your hands smell like a chemical factory despite 3 washings. And you're only halfway through your actual workday because closing the shop to customers just means beginning the evening maintenance that keeps the operation functional. Thomas is already sweeping, pushing the day's debris stacked in mud, spilled powders, that mysterious dust that seems to generate spontaneously toward the door in methodical strokes. You taught him this routine, just as Mr. Pemberton taught you, and watching him work with tired efficiency gives you a strange satisfaction. At least someone else is sharing the exhaustion now. Start checking the common remedies, you tell him, already moving toward the ledger. Anything we dispensed more than 3 times today needs restocking tonight, so we're ready for tomorrow morning. He nods, setting aside the broom, and begins his inventory rounds while you settle onto the stool behind the counter to face the ledger, that massive, ink-stained record of every transaction, every debt, every credit, every note about customer needs and stock requirements. The day's entries fill 3 pages in your cramped handwriting, each line recording a transaction. Mrs. Best. Patterson cough syrup, opium, IPEC at 40 cents, PAID. Mr. Chen laudanum, refill 60 cent, CRED. Balance now, 2.40. Anonymous arsenic complexion wafers, 75 cents, PED. You tally the cash column first, counting actual coins received. $4.30. Not terrible for a Tuesday, but not impressive either, especially when you calculate what's owed versus what's paid. The credit column makes you wince. $6.75 in sales made on credit today alone, adding to the existing balance of, you flip back pages, calculating accumulated debts, $43.15 total owed to the shop by various customers. Some of these debts are months old. Some will never be paid. Mr. Pemberton has taught you to categorize them mentally, likely to pay eventually, maybe if times improve, and forget about it. That last category includes people who've moved away, died, or simply decided that moral obligation to pay debts is optional. The mainstream historical fact that defines small business economics in the 19th century is that most transactions, especially in working-class neighborhoods, operated on informal credit systems because cash was scarce and irregular. You weren't running a cash business. You were running a community bank where medicine was the currency and repayment was aspirational. Some apothecaries failed, not because they couldn't attract customers, but because they couldn't collect payment from the customers they had. You note tomorrow's needs in the margins. Order more ipecacuanha low. Mercury compound depleted check back stock. Leach jar needs fresh water. These marginal notes are crucial because your memory isn't reliable after 12-hour days, and running out of common remedies means losing sales to Edmund's shop down the street, who would love nothing more than to steal customers during your supply gaps. Thomas calls from the back room. We're down to 2 bottles of laudanum. One of those is half empty, and the camphor is getting low. You make notes, calculating whether you can stretch supplies until the next wholesale order or whether you need to buy emergency stock from another apothecary at marked up prices. It's a constant optimization problem. Order too much and money sits idle in inventory. Order too little and you lose sales. You're neither a mathematician nor a fortune teller, but you're expected to be both. The cleanup begins in earnest around 8 o'clock. You scrub the counter with soap and coarse sand, attacking the sticky residue from spilled syrups and the powder films that accumulate despite your best efforts at neat compounding. That persistent stain you mentioned on your first day? Still there. You've accepted it as permanent, a mark of the shop's history that no amount of scrubbing will remove. Some stains are just part of the architecture now. The mortars and pestles need thorough cleaning. You can't have yesterday's mercury compounds contaminating tomorrow's harmless herbs. You scrub each one with salt and hot water, inspecting for residue, because cross-contamination ranges from embarrassing to fatal, depending on what gets mixed. Your hands are raw from the cleaning agents, cracked and sore, and you've given up hoping they'll heal because tomorrow you'll just damage them again. Here's the quirky detail about apothecary shop maintenance. Many shops developed elaborate cleaning rituals that bordered on superstitious, like always wiping down shelves in the same direction or never leaving mortars inverted overnight. Historians still argue whether these rituals represented proto-sterile technique based on observed contamination patterns, or whether they were just comforting routines that made dangerous work feel more controlled. Either way, you follow Mr. Racy Porce's, Pemberton's specific cleaning order religiously because deviating from it feels like inviting disaster. The scales need checking and recalibrating. You use the standard weights to ensure accuracy hasn't drifted during the day's heavy use. The balance is slightly off. You make minute adjustments, testing repeatedly until the needle settles perfectly at equilibrium. This tedious precision matters enormously when you're measuring substances where the difference between therapeutic and toxic is measured in grains. Thomas mops the floor with water and vinegar, filling the shop with sharp, clean smell that temporarily overwhelms the perpetual camphor. The floorboards are stained dark from years of spills, and the grout between stones is permanently discolored, but at least the surface dirt comes up, creating the illusion of cleanliness, even if the deeper stains tell the truth about decades of chemical exposure. You restock the front display shelves. arranging bottles with their labels facing outward, ensuring the most attractive containers occupy eye-level positions. This is retail theatre. The appearance of abundance and organization suggests professional competence even when your backroom is chaotic and your inventory is worryingly low on certain items. The bottles gleam in the lamplight, their contents promising health, relief, cure, or at least comfortable delusion. By 9 o'clock, the shop is as clean and organized as it's going to get. You do a final walkthrough, checking that all flames are extinguished, all containers are properly sealed, all valuable substances are secured. You've heard stories of shops burning overnight from forgotten lamps or being robbed for their opium and arsenic supplies. Your vigilance is part security measure, part exhaustion-fighting ritual that ensures you've actually completed everything before surrendering to sleep. Remember that bell that's marked your entire day? You check it one last time, ensuring it's still attached securely, because losing your customer announcement system would be like losing your shop's voice. Satisfied, you follow Thomas out the door, turn the heavy lock, and step into the evening darkness. The street is quiet. Most businesses already closed, only the tavern down the way showing light and life. Your body aches with the particular exhaustion of physical labor combined with mental vigilance. You've spent the day both grinding substances and making life or death calculations, both performing repetitive tasks and exercising professional judgment. It's a unique kind of tired that sleep never quite cures, because tomorrow brings identical demands. You walk home slowly, hands still smelling faintly of camphor despite washing, mind already planning tomorrow's tasks, the routine beginning again before this one has fully ended. The ledger sits on your small desk at home. You've taken to bringing it back, evenings when the day's entries need careful review without customer interruptions. The candlelight flickers across pages dense with names, numbers, dates, and marginal notes that tell the economic story of your community in cramped handwriting. Each line is a negotiation between compassion and solvency, between healthcare access and business survival. You're not just recording transactions, you're documenting the impossible math of providing medical care to people who can't reliably pay for it. The Callahan family account spans 3 pages now, dating back 7 months. You flip through their history: cough syrups for the children, laudanum for the grandmother's chronic pain, fever reducers during the winter illness season, digestive remedies, salves for injuries. The total owed climbs steadily: $2, $4, $7.40. Occasional small payments appear: 25 cents paid cash, 50 cents paid eggs and butter. The net balance remains stubbornly high. You know Patrick Callahan works irregular construction jobs, that his wife takes in laundry, that their income barely covers food and rent. You also know they need medicine more than most families because their children seem perpetually ill. You mark their account with a pencil notation you've developed: essential, extend credit. This means you'll continue serving them regardless of payment, because denying them medicine feels morally impossible, even though it's financially stupid. Mr. Pemberton has his own system of symbols, dots, crosses, underlines that indicate his assessment of each debt's collectability. Your systems overlap but don't quite match, creating a layered code only the two of you can read. The Henderson account shows different patterns: consistent small purchases, always paid immediately in cash, but the frequency suggests concerning hypochondria. 42 transactions in the past 3 months, totaling nearly $15, all paid, making him simultaneously your best customer and your most exhausting. You don't mark his account with anything except dates and amounts, but mentally you've categorized him as profitable nuisance. The mainstream historical fact that shapes small business accounting in the 19th century is that formal bookkeeping was extremely variable. There were no standardized accounting principles, no regulatory requirements, no audit procedures. Your ledger system is whatever Mr. Pemberton taught you, which was whatever his master taught him, creating generational variation in how businesses tracked their finances. Some shops kept meticulous records, others barely bothered. You're somewhere in the middle, detailed enough to track debts but not so rigorous that you're recording every grain of powder used. The barter arrangements require separate notation systems that turn your ledger into a peculiar catalogue of rural economics. Mrs. O'Brien pays partially in eggs. 3 dozen eggs equal approximately 50 cents in medicine value, though this conversion rate fluctuates with egg prices and your negotiating mood. You record cough syrup 60 cents, value paid 36 eggs, 50 plus 10 cash. The eggs then become part of your personal food budget, a side benefit of accepting non-cash payment that helps offset your modest wages. The Chen family trades preserved vegetables for medicine, an arrangement that's worked for months now. Laudanum refill 60, cent paid 4 jars pickled cabbage 40 plus 20 credit. You actually prefer their pickled cabbage to eggs since it stores better and adds variety to your diet. This informal economy runs parallel to cash transactions, creating a web of exchanges where medicine moves in one direction and goods, services or promises move in the other. Mr. Sullivan occasionally pays by repairing things around the shop, fixing a broken shelf, replacing worn door hinges, mending the delivery cart. You record these as paid labor, estimating the value of his work against the medicine's cost. It's imprecise accounting that would horrify any formal bookkeeper, but it works within your community's economic reality, where cash scarcity makes barter not just acceptable, but necessary. Here's the quirky detail that surprises modern people. Many 19th century apothecary shops essentially operated as informal community banks, extending credit based on personal relationships and character assessments rather than credit-worthiness metrics. You were making lending decisions without credit scores, collateral requirements, or legal enforcement mechanisms, just your judgment about whether someone would eventually pay and whether denying the medicine was worth the moral cost. Historians still argue whether this system represented admirable community solidarity or poor business practice that led many apothecaries into financial distress, but you're living the reality of both possibilities simultaneously. You've developed categories for debt likelihood that you don't write explicitly but maintain mentally. Category 1. Will definitely pay eventually. People with steady employment and pride about settling debts. These accounts can grow large without worry. Category 2. Probably will pay something, maybe not everything. Families with irregular income who make good faith efforts but whose circumstances limit follow-through. These require monitoring and occasional gentle reminders. Category 3. Payment, unlikely but morally obligated to serve anyway. The truly poor, the chronically ill, the desperate cases where withholding medicine feels unconscionable regardless of payment prospects. Then there's Category 4, which you don't discuss with anyone. Definitely won't pay and knows it. These are people exploiting your compassion, running up bills with no intention of payment, treating your shop like a free charity while you're struggling to keep solvent yourself. You've learned to recognize them. They avoid eye contact when discussing payment, make elaborate promises about next week, and often migrate between different apothecaries once their debts become too obvious. You're trying to develop the professional hardness to refuse them, but it's difficult when they present genuine medical needs. The monthly accounting ritual happens on the last Sunday of each month. You total all income, all expenses, all new debts, all payments on old debts. The numbers tell a story that's rarely encouraging. This month, $48 in sales, $32 paid in cash or barter, $16 added to credit accounts. Expenses, $12 in wholesale supplies, $3 in lamp oil and cleaning materials, $2 in building maintenance, Mr. Stair. Pemberton's payment to you of $4. The remaining profiteef, you can call it, that is $17, of which $16 exists only as receivables that may or may not ever materialize as actual money. You cross-reference the debt list against your mental categories, calculating realistic collection rates. Of the $43 owed total, you estimate maybe $25 will eventually be paid, $10 will be partially paid, and $8 will never materialize. This means your real net position is worse than the ledger suggests. You're carrying losses disguised as receivables, pretending debts are assets when they're actually charitable donations you can't afford to make. Remember Mrs. Patterson, who's appeared throughout these sections as a regular customer? Her account shows consistent small debts with irregular small payments. She's category 2, trying but struggling. You could press harder for payment, could refuse further credit until her balance is cleared. But her children genuinely need medicine and she's clearly doing her best, so you extend the account another month with a marginal note. Continue service monitor balance. The ledger becomes your evening companion, this leather-bound record of community health and economic struggle. Each entry is a small decision about balancing business survival against human need, about calculating not just monetary value but moral obligation. You're learning that accounting in a small apothecary shop isn't really about number sites, about judgment calls, dressed up as bookkeeping, compassion disguised as credit extensions, and the quiet acceptance that helping people might mean never quite achieving financial security yourself. The newspaper article arrives in a medical journal that Mr. Pemberton subscribes to, and he reads it aloud during a rare, slow afternoon with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for prescriptions. Dr. Robert Koch in Germany has demonstrated that specific bacteria cause specific diseases. Tuberculosis, he claims, is not caused by miasma or constitutional weakness, but by microscopic organisms that can be identified, isolated, and potentially treated through targeted intervention. He looks up from the page, his expression unreadable. They're calling it germ theory. If it's correct, everything we think we know about disease causation is wrong. You feel the ground shifting beneath your feet, though you're standing perfectly still. Germ theory isn't new exactly. You've heard whispers about it for months, read fragments of debates in medical publications, listen to physicians argue about Pasteur's work in France and Lister's antiseptic techniques in England. But this feels different somehow, more definitive, less dismissible as fringe speculation. If disease comes from specific microorganisms rather than bad air and humoral imbalances, then half of what you're doing is based on fundamentally flawed understanding. So the miasmas, you start, then trail off, uncertain how to finish the sentence. If miasmas don't exist, then all that aromatic fumigation, all those recommendations about avoiding night air, all the theory you've been confidently explaining to customers is just wrong. Elaborate mythology you've been perpetuating with professional authority might be nonsense, Mr. Pemberton finishes quietly, or might be partially right for wrong. Reason-spleening does seem to help, even if the mechanism isn't what we thought. But yes, if Koch and Pasteur are correct, we've been treating the symptoms while completely misunderstanding the causes. The question is what we do with this information. We can't suddenly tell customers that everything we've said about humoral theory is outdated, and we can't treat bacterial infections effectively anyway. Knowing they exist doesn't give us weapons against them. So we continue as we are, but with growing awareness that we're practicing medicine in a transitional period between old certainty and new understanding. The mainstream historical fact that medical historians emphasize is that germ theory's acceptance wasn't instantaneous. It took decades for the medical establishment to fully adopt bacteriological understanding and abandon older theories about disease causation. Your confusion and uncertainty aren't failures of intelligence. They're historically accurate responses to a paradigm shift happening in real time. You're watching one medical worldview collapse and another emerge, and nobody's quite sure yet which practices to keep and which to discard. But germ theory isn't the only wind of change blowing through your profession. The movement toward professional licensing has been growing stronger, with state medical associations pushing for mandatory examinations and credentials. Currently, anyone can call themselves an apothecary or physician with minimal oversight, which keeps the profession accessible but also allows incompetent or fraudulent practitioners to operate freely. The proposed licensing requirements would establish standards, require formal training, and create barriers to entry that might improve quality but would also limit access. They're talking about mandatory pharmacy examinations in New York, Mr. Pemberton mentions during your evening inventory one night. Standardized testing of pharmaceutical knowledge, chemistry, even some medical theory. Pass the exam, you're licensed. Fail, and you can't legally practice. He doesn't say the obvious. Neither of you has formal credentials beyond apprenticeship. If licensing becomes mandatory, you'd need to pass examinations testing knowledge you learned informally, possibly against standards you've never been taught. You feel the threat implicitly. Edmund's shop down the street, with his pharmaceutical chemist title and his modern approach, seems better positioned for a credentialed future than your traditional apprenticeship model. The travelling shows would be shut down, which is good, but you might get caught in the same regulatory net designed to eliminate frauds. Here's the quirky detail about pharmacy licensing movements. Many established apothecaries actually opposed standardization, not because they were incompetent, but because they resented outside authorities determining practice standards that they'd been setting through professional tradition for generations. Historians still argue whether licensing improved public safety or whether it primarily served to create professional monopolies that excluded capable practitioners who couldn't afford formal education or who learned through alternative pathways like apprenticeship. The pharmaceutical manufacturing companies represent perhaps the most fundamental threat to your professional independence. For centuries, apothecaries compounded every medicine individually, giving you control over formulas, quality, and customization. But companies like Parke-Davis and Eli Lilly are beginning large-scale manufacturing of standardized medicine suniform tablets, pre-measured powders, bottled compounds that anyone can sell without pharmaceutical expertise. The vision seems to be separating drug manufacturing from drug dispensing, turning apothecaries from craftsmen into retailers. Received a catalogue from a Philadelphia pharmaceutical manufacturer. Mr. Pemberton says one morning, flipping through its pages with obvious distaste. They're offering pre-compounded medicines in bulk at prices we can't match by making them ourselves. Same remedies we prepare daily, but produced in factories with economy of scale we'll never achieve. He closes the catalogue firmly. If this becomes the standard, we're just shopkeepers stocking other people's products rather than pharmaceutical professionals crafting individualized treatments. You sense the loss of something difficult to articulate, not just economic independence, but professional identity. Your skill at grinding, measuring, compounding, customizing remedies becomes less valuable in a world where medicines arrive pre-made from distant factories. The personal knowledge you've accumulated about each customer's needs, the careful adjustments you make to standard formulas, the craft aspect of pharmaceutical work, all of it becomes obsolete if medicine transforms into standardized products distributed through retail channels. Remember that mortar and pestle that's defined so much of your training? You look at it differently now, wondering if you're learning a skill that's already dying, mastering techniques that won't matter in 10 years when everything arrives in bottles from manufacturing facilities. Thomas is learning to grind powders precisely, but will precision compounding exist by the time he's a master apothecary himself? The conversations with other apothecaries at professional gatherings have changed tone recently. Less competitive, boasting about shop success, more anxious speculation about the profession's future. Will there still be independent apothecaries in 20 years, or will everyone work for large pharmaceutical companies or chain drugstores? Will compounding remain a core skill or become a specialty service for rare cases? Nobody knows. But everyone senses the traditional model is threatened. Some practitioners embrace the changes enthusiastically. Edmund has already started stocking more manufactured medicines, positioning himself as a modern pharmaceutical chemist ready for the new era. Others resist bitterly, viewing standardization as the death of pharmaceutical artistry. You're somewhere in the middle, curious about scientific advances, skeptical of corporate control, uncertain whether professionalization means improvement or just different gatekeeping. At night, you think about the future you're training for and whether it will exist when you're ready to claim it. The medical knowledge you're memorizing might be obsolete. The compounding skills you're mastering might be unnecessary. The professional independence Mr. Farmer Pemberton represents might be impossible in an era of licensing requirements and corporate manufacturing. You're apprenticing into a profession that's transforming around you, and nobody can tell you what it will look like when the transformation completes. But tomorrow you'll still grind powders and mix compounds and explain humoral theory to customers, because today's work can't wait for tomorrow's understanding to arrive. The day ends the way it always does, with the heavy iron key turning in the lock, the bolt sliding home with a decisive click that separates professional responsibility from personal exhaustion. You stand on the street side of the door for a moment, hand still on the key, looking back through the window at the dim interior. The lamps are extinguished. The bottles gleam faintly in the moonlight, filtering through those mullioned windows. The shop looks smaller from out here, more vulnerable, like seeing a familiar face in unflattering light that reveals previously invisible flaws. 9 months. You've been doing this for 9 months, which feels simultaneously like forever and no time at all. You remember your first day, the overwhelming smell, the intimidating shelves, the terrifying realization that people would trust you with their lives based on a few months of training. That version of you seems impossibly naive now, though you're not certain the current version is actually any more qualified. You've just learned to project confidence while harboring the same doubts, to speak with authority about remedies you half believe in, to fulfill the role people need even when you're not sure you're genuinely helping. The small victories accumulate in ways difficult to articulate. Mrs. Patterson's child recovered from that cough, whether because of your syrup or despite it you'll never know, but she thanked you with tears in her eyes, and you felt briefly like you might actually be good at this. Mr. Chen's pain stays manageable with his laudanum refills, which makes you simultaneously proud of providing relief and worried about enabling addiction. The Henderson family continues their hypochondriacal visits, and you've learned that sometimes medicine is just listening patiently while someone describes symptoms that probably don't exist. That's care too, in its own way. The compromises weigh differently in retrospect. You've sold patent medicines you know are useless, because refusing means losing customers to competitors who have fewer scruples. You've extended credit to families who'll never pay, while denying it to others based on judgments that might be unfair. You've compounded remedies following doctors' illegible prescriptions that might have been misread, hoping your interpretation was close enough. You've explained humoral theory with confidence, while privately doubting its validity. You've handled poisons daily, absorbing trace amounts that are slowly damaging your body in ways you won't fully understand for years. The healer merchant tension never resolves. Some days you feel like a healthcare provider offering essential services to a community that needs you. Other days you feel like a shopkeeper selling hope in bottles, profiting from desperation while providing treatments that range from marginally helpful to completely ineffective. Both realities exist simultaneously, and you've stopped trying to decide which one is true, because they're both true, constantly, in ways that create moral vertigo if you think too hard about it. You've learned things beyond pharmaceutical knowledge: how to read people's unspoken needs, how to maintain professional boundaries while providing emotional support, how to balance compassion against solvency, how to make life and death decisions based on incomplete information and hope you chose correctly. You've developed calluses, both physical and emotional hands toughened by chemical exposure, heart hardened slightly by the constant proximity to suffering you can't fully address. Remember, Thomas, your apprentice who reminds you uncomfortably of your own recent beginnings? He's learning the same contradictions, absorbing the same doubts disguised as training, preparing for a profession that might not exist in its current form by the time he's ready to practice independently. You're teaching him to grind powders precisely while pharmaceutical manufacturing threatens to make the skill obsolete. You're instilling professional pride in compounding while licensing requirements might render traditional apprenticeship insufficient. You're passing down knowledge that's simultaneously essential and possibly irrelevant, and you can't tell him which parts will matter in 10 years. The shop itself has become like a second home you know. Every creaking floorboard, every stained shelf, every temperamental drawer. You can navigate it in darkness. You could inventory the front shelves blindfolded by touch alone. The smell of camphor and tobacco and old wood has soaked into your clothes, your hair, your skin. You'll carry it with you for years, a scent memory that will always mean this place, this time, this impossible profession. The community role has settled around you like an ill-fitting coat you've gradually adjusted to wearing. People know you now. They greet you on the street, share neighborhood gossip, ask casual medical questions that require professional answers. You're simultaneously a craftsman, a merchant, a counselor, a healer, a neighbor, and a keeper of secrets. The role requires inhabiting all these identities simultaneously, switching between them fluidly as situations demand. The uncertainty about the profession's future doesn't keep you from returning tomorrow. Germ theory might overturn everything you think you know about disease, but customers will still arrive with symptoms requiring treatment. Pharmaceutical manufacturers might make compounding obsolete, but you'll still need to dispense remedies and provide guidance. Licensing requirements might credential the profession or exclude you from it, but either way, people will need medicine and someone has to provide it. You turn away from the locked door, pocketing the key that's become a symbol of trust and responsibility and the small power you wield over this narrow domain. The street is quiet. The evening air is cool. Your body aches with familiar exhaustion. Tomorrow you'll unlock this same door, light these same lamps, begin this same routine with its mixture of mundane tasks and consequential decisions. You're part healer, part merchant, part craftsman, part performance artist, creating theatre around medicine that might or might not work. You've traded your health for a profession that's slowly poisoning you. You've accepted responsibility for community well-being you're not fully qualified to manage. You've learned to live with doubt while projecting certainty, to provide hope while harboring skepticism, to fulfill a role that society needs even when you're not sure you're adequate to it. But the shop will open tomorrow. The bell will jangle. Customers will arrive with their desperate trust and their inadequate coins. And you'll be there, standing behind that counter, surrounded by bottles of dubious remedies, doing your best with imperfect knowledge in an impossible profession. The small victories and quiet compromises continue, day by day, patient by patient, one locked door and one morning reopening at a time. The key turns one last time, the bolt sliding home with that familiar weight of responsibility and release intertwining, metal against metal, closure and promise both. You stand there in the gathering darkness, hands still resting on the door, feeling the cool evening air settle around you like a gentle blanket. The shop windows behind you hold the day's last reflected light, bottles gleaming softly, patient and waiting. 9 months of grinding powders and measuring grains, of deciphering illegible prescriptions and extending impossible credit, of handling poisons with steady hands and harboring doubts with quiet persistence. 9 months of becoming someone people trust with their vulnerabilities, their pain, their hope that something in those mysterious bottles might ease their suffering just enough to continue. The contradictions have become comfortable now, like old clothes worn soft with use. You know you're practicing medicine that's part science, part superstition, part theatre. You know your remedies range from genuinely helpful to expensively useless. You know you're simultaneously healing and profiting, helping and guessing, confident and uncertain in measures that shift moment by moment. And somehow, impossibly, this has become normal. This has become your life. Tomorrow the bell will ring again, bringing new needs and familiar faces, desperate requests and routine refills. Tomorrow you'll grind more powders, mix more compounds, extend more credit to people who probably can't pay. Tomorrow you'll make more decisions with insufficient knowledge and hope they're right more often than wrong. But tonight you walk home slowly, letting the day drain away with each step. Your hands still smell faintly of camphor and carbolic acid. Your back aches from the perpetual stoop. Your mind holds the day's transactions, the worried faces, the small moments of connection that make the impossible work meaningful. The stars are emerging overhead, constant and distant and indifferent to human suffering and human healing both. You breathe deeply, feeling the cool air fill your lungs, and somewhere in the peaceful exhaustion you find something like contentment, sweet dreams.